We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. It's been a devastatingly horrible news week, so we're not going to dwell on any of the awful things that have gone on. Recently this morning, you probably haven't even seen the news, Tom. Tom's been busy. Tom might have to cut out early today, not for any world news reasons, but for behind-the-scenes personal reasons, things going on, cars,
what
all
the
that
heck
type
did
of
I miss
stuff.
in the news? I missed things in the news?
Yeah, the morning that we're recording this, there's been horrible Russia-Ukraine stuff.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Yes, I did not see any of that.
Terrible
so
news,
I'm going to have to go.
We don't need to discuss it on this podcast anyway, and there was like, I know you're not a big hockey fan, but you're not against hockey or anything, but there was absolutely horrible, tragic news in the NHL hockey world, so it's been not fun, not good.
I have a flat on my my tire.
Relatively
in my
speaking,
car.
that's good news this week. It's not.
That's
good
why I
news,
missed
but-
apparently all the rest of this news because I was
That's
too
right.
busy getting the car dropped off.
And,
so
and
yes,
possibly having to leave this podcast to deal with some of that stuff
Yes.
while that's going on today, because everything's got to happen on Tuesday mornings. So
Tuesday mornings, and next week I'll be gone.
that is also true. We'll
Yes,
have
I'm
guest
gonna-
co-host. I certainly have one
Guest
person already.
co-host. I have a dental procedure. They
Okay.
are pulling a tooth.
Oh, wow. All
yeah,
right.
I know. It sounds like what? You're like 50 plus, which is
Yeah.
what I'm going to be for the rest of my life. In case you're asking my age, is
Yeah,
50
yeah.
plus
You
until
will
I
be.
die.
We'll be over that.
yeah,
that
I had
landmark.
I had a period of my life where I just didn't go to the dentist for a long time.
Oh,
And then
sure. Okay.
At some point, a tooth had gotten really bad, and they capped it and root canaled it and everything. But now underneath the cap, the tooth is. There wasn't a lot there to begin with, and they're like,
Okay.
yeah, it's kind of gone. So
Ah.
I'm gonna have to have that pulled. It's a molar in the back. They're like, it's not gonna affect your quality of life, but you have to get it pulled. I'm like, okay.
I see.
All right.
Well,
so,
that's to look forward to next week.
apparently,
Hooray.
you guys have fun without me.
Oh,
What did you
goodness
watch
gracious.
this week, Rob?
Yeah, and we do have oodles of questions to get to this week before you go, so we'll see what we can put a dent in. But as far as what was watched this week, I'll start off by saying, have started rewatching the series Humans,
I don't know
which
about it.
I think was on BBC in the UK. It's on Acorn as far as services go.
It's like a superhero thing, though.
Not at all. This is androids, synths.
I seem to remember that popping up on Netflix. at
Yes,
some
it ran
point.
for 3 seasons, but being a British TV series, it's only 8 episodes per season. They had been like planning on a 4th, but I've never seen the 3rd and final season, but apparently it wraps up satisfactorily enough. Like there's lots of open things that could have gone into in season 4, but they kind of wrapped up the major story thread, apparently, is the Scuttlebutt Online. So I'm looking forward to getting to the end of that, but I'm starting from season 1 again. Love this series. Gemma Chan is sort of the standout performance. She's the main synthetic, and she is so darn good at being very close to human. Like that's really hard to do as an actual human person pretending to be a robot, to be so good at being so close to human that it's a little bit uncanny and unnerving, but so convincing that it's like I completely forget that that's a human actor. I'm like, it's like that's a really convincing android. She's so good at as the main android in the series. Absolute standout. You might know her from the Eternals in Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I probably do.
That's probably the thing she's been seen in the most, even though the Eternals was not like the most popular of the Marvel movies. But anyway, she's absolutely fantastic. Everybody, the whole cast in Humans is fantastic, at least in the first season, which is the only one that I saw all the way through and absolutely loved. So yeah, that's going back to like 2015, 2016. And I did see the first season, but I'm rewatching it from the beginning and I forgot a fair amount. So it was absolutely worthwhile. I just wanted to mention in Canada for sure, it's very difficult to find the first season to watch. The second and third seasons, readily available. No idea why the first season and only the first season is like nigh impossible to find online. I ended up ordering the Blu-rays off of Amazon, and I got the last copy of the Blu-ray available from Amazon.ca. So good luck, I guess, finding it. But it should be available in other countries through the Acorn streaming service, or Hoopla, apparently, also has it, which is not a streaming service I'm familiar with, but it shows up in Just Watch. But anyway, I highly recommend it. It's sort of underwatched, underknown if you're not familiar with it. If you're at all interested in that sort of alternate history, like sort of contemporary time, but an alternate world where we have these very convincing androids and just really interesting scenarios that they put everyone through. And I love the humor in it, and I love the sci-fi of it, and it's fantastic. Go watch Humans if you can. Yeah, you wanted to say something, Tom?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The movie I watched this week, and I only watched one, was Immaculate. So this is, I think it just came out earlier this year. Horror film set, within the Catholic Church. Sydney Sweeney is the main star. She also produced this movie. She auditioned for the script that ultimately became this movie many years ago. Like, she was 17 years old when she auditioned for it. Liked it so much and remembered it so much that once she had the opportunity with her own production company, that she bought the rights to it and financed it and produced it and ended up starring in it herself. So I guess I'm gonna get in trouble with about half of the population in the United States for saying that I really liked this movie, because it is not subtle in its political messaging about the take that it has, and it's going to have half the U.S. country going yay and half the U.S. country going you're awful. So yeah, I fall on the side of very much liking this movie. I thought just as a horror movie, let's take all the politics and weirdness of that side of things out of it entirely. Just as a horror movie, I really enjoyed it. It's not that it was like truly innovative in terms of the jump scares that it had and stuff, but it's just everything was executed really well. They did the anticipation of the jump scare so perfectly, pitch perfect in the anticipation, because that's what really gets you. It's that buildup, right? Anybody can shock you with a loud noise, but you don't like think of it as having been pulled off really well if it's just like, oh, a loud noise appeared out of nowhere. So what? It's the anticipation leading up to it that requires some skill in the filmmaking to pull off. And then for the jump scares themselves, they did a great job of misdirection. It was like you thought it was going to come from this side of the screen, but it came from the other side of the screen. There was one jump scare that outright made me physically flinch, which really rarely happens to me watching a movie, and I was like, well done. It's not that I wasn't expecting the jump scare to happen. They had set it up. You were anticipating it, but the actual execution of it, I'm like, I physically flinched. I couldn't help it. It was really fun that way. Performances are strong throughout this. It was shot for only $9 million, but they actually went to Rome and shot there, and the scenery that they had, the set that they had, I mean, it wasn't a constructed set. They were actually at an existing Roman villa with a church on the grounds, and they filmed there. It's actually the same location where The Blood of Dracula was filmed many years ago. Notice that in sort of the history footnotes. So, I mean, it looks fantastic because they went to a real location. They actually went into the real catacombs below Rome and shot scenes there. So, I mean, how they got permission to do all this and on the budget that they had, there's no way they could have constructed these sets for the type of budget that they were working with. So it was a fantastic idea and move to be able to like lease these spaces and shoot your movie there, because it absolutely lends so much to the feeling of the movie to have these, really beautiful and large places that they're filming the movie in. Came across really well. I have to say, Sydney Sweeney herself, she has some real standout scenes in this. It's some of my favorites as far as the performance that she gave. But the one thing I don't think she's particularly good at is evoking that she's being scared. Like, she's supposed to be frightened in quite a few scenes of this movie. And I think it's because she already has quite wide eyes. Like, she doesn't have squinty eyes at all. Her eyes are always wide. That's just her natural face. And so her making her eyes wider doesn't really look that different from the way she normally looks. And that's kind of the only thing she does to look scared is widen her eyes a little bit more. And I'm like, it doesn't really read. But when she gets angry, when she gets frustrated, when she gets determined, like all of those things, I think this is one of my favorite performances that I've seen from her. So yeah, I like Immaculate quite a lot. It's got like basically a 50-50 rating through all the ratings. I'm honestly a little bit surprised. I think it's because it wasn't that widely seen and didn't have like a huge box office. I'm almost a little bit surprised that Sydney Sweeney and other people involved in making this movie hadn't have more like threats sent their way, because like I say, it is
people ideas.
Well, it's not as though the people who do that sort of thing are getting the idea from me, but it's just like, because it isn't subtle in any way in the stance that it's taking on things like bodily autonomy. So anyway, I give it a big old thumbs up. If you're like not gonna be really politically weird about it, if you are, just avoid it. Don't put yourself through it. You know you're not going to like it. You know what I'm talking about. There. I'll leave it at that. Let's not get in trouble on YouTube. What did you watch, Tom?
I actually watched movies this week. We're watching Paralympics, of course, because it's pretty awesome. We watched a game called Goal Ball, which I had no idea existed. But
that's news to me, too. Yeah.
If you have never seen it, which I think you probably haven't, and that is not a play on the game itself. That's not some sort of word play. It's just you haven't seen it. It's a long goal on like separated by, I don't know, maybe 50 feet, maybe less, 25 to 50 feet, somewhere in there. And there's 3 players on each side. And the goal itself is long enough that if you laid the players on the ground,
end to end,
toes to feet, toes to hands, they would stretch across.
I see. Okay.
Which is important because basically everybody's blind on both sides. So it is like a dodgeball, but doesn't bounce very well. Okay. And they have to bounce it once on their side, bounce it once on the other side, and then it's legal to go into the goal. And they just kind of throw it back and forth at each other, and they're doing it completely on sound because everybody's blind.
Interesting.
And it is so impressive to watch. The game itself, when you look at it, you're like, this looks kind of dumb. And then you realize, first of all, they have different levels of visual impairment. So to make sure that it's equal, they put like bandages over their eyes, and they put these crazy goggles, like it looks like underwater goggles.
Right.
That has a nose guard on it because you might get hit in the face.
Sure.
Any number of things that you can't see because you're blind. And they have goggles, and they have to protect their face and also make sure that they can't see anything.
So anybody, like outside of the Olympics, I'm talking about, anybody could play this game.
Yes.
Because anybody who's sighted, you just wear that same apparatus, and now you don't have your vision.
But they're like passing the ball to each other. I'm like, you could accidentally score on yourself, I suppose. I don't know how that works, but it feels that way. But they are handing each other the ball. They know where each other are. Yep. They have tape on the ground to delineate like the 3 different sections of that are down there, and they like kind of feel around on the ground in order to feel where it is very impressive. I was like, this is like, first of all, I mean, I understand that as a person that doesn't have any disabilities, I don't have to come up with games for sports for people who do have disabilities, but a million years I wouldn't have come up with this sport.
But I feel like in school, this would be a great game to get kids to play, because it's educational. It's clearly different, right? It'll stimulate your mind. So
because they're doing everything on hearing, so you have to hear the ball coming towards
you. Feel as well, right?
Yeah, it's nuts. Cool. So it was very, very interesting. It also helps that Turkey, my wife is Turkish, has been like dominant in this sport. Like the last 3 Olympics, we've only watched one game of it, and it was Turkey versus China, and Turkey lost. It was the second game they've lost in the last 3 Olympics. They have not. They've only lost. They've tied, but they've not lost any games except for 2 in the last 3 Olympics. So we're kind of watching that. But anyways, that's
okay.
I watched 2 movies this week. I watched Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. I don't know if the Part 2 has come out yet.
They're not going to title the second part 2. So it's just going to be a really weird historical artifact, the titling of that movie.
Anyways, wow. I mean, so Mission Impossible movies, for me, for the most part, have been like mysteries, right? That's the whole thing. You got to figure out who the bad guy and stuff like that is and everything else. This was refreshingly straightforward. Like, the plot is not hard to follow.
Oh, no. And
in the least.
My goodness. Are they looking for a key? Because I think that word might have been said more times than any other time in history.
So it's a perfectly fine movie. I do feel like they're gonna need to start using that de-aging technology on Tom Cruise because he's the whatever work he's doing on or having done is finally getting to the point where it's no longer keeping up with gravity.
He doesn't quite look the same anymore. So the next one, they're not going to call it part 2 because it is clearly years later.
Yeah, it's gonna have to be.
Yeah.
Haley Atwell, is that her name?
Haley Atwell. Yep.
Just Atwell is. God, she is so good.
You might know her as Peggy Carter from the MCU, if you're trying to picture her.
What a waste. She has been. She was great in the Captain America movies, no doubt about that. I'm not going to take anything away from her.
And she had a great TV series that was criminally underwatched. 2 seasons.
Criminally underwatched. And honestly, maybe it's not. It could be more than just like people should have watched it. It could have been better. It's not like it was.
I suppose.
I
liked that series though.
I thought it was fine. I think it could have been better. I'm not gonna lie.
Right.
But she is so good in this. She is phenomenal. And you know what? As I was watching the movie, I was like, I kind of want Tom Cruise to die so that not in real life.
There was some of the thought that spin-off type of ideas.
Yeah, she could totally carry this series. Are you kidding me? We need to have a training montage and then her being the new Mission Impossible person.
I'm mad about the Rebecca Ferguson situation, though, because if you wanted to team up Haley Atwell and Rebecca Ferguson and go with them as a series, I'm like, heck yeah.
Anyways,
that would
great.
Be fantastic.
Good movie. Good movie. Certainly worth the watch. There's nothing wrong with it.
Oh, yeah.
And you do not have to pay attention. Things will happen, and you'll be like, are they still looking for the key? Yes, they are. Okay, are they on the train?
Oh, and they'll remind you.
They'll
remind you in dialogue that they are looking for that key.
And it's an interesting, I guess, bad guy they have going on right now. But whatever. I think it's all it's whatever. Okay. The other thing I watched was Prometheus. We talked about
that's got to be a rewatch, right? You've seen that
a rewatch.
Before.
I've seen it before, but it's been long enough, and I think I fell asleep.
Okay.
I mean, I might have fallen asleep during parts or all of it. I don't really remember. We had talked about Alien, Romulus, whatever, and then you had talked about rewatching the thing, and I was like, maybe I should give those movies because I've got both those movies.
Chronologically speaking, Prometheus is first in the Alien series,
and then Covenant. And I was like, okay. And then I started, for whatever reason, across my social media feeds, there was like people who were talking about the lore of Aliens, and I started watching them. And the more that I watched it, the more that the algorithm feeds them to me. So now I've just got oodles of people talking about the lore and stuff.
Well, yes, because they're very upset because everything doesn't line up perfectly because Ridley Scott never envisioned this as a decades-long franchise when he made the very first movie, and then it went through other directors, and they didn't necessarily intend... It's kind of like the X-Men movies, right? By the end of it, they wanted it to be one continuous timeline, but it just doesn't fit perfectly together, and there's no way it's ever going to.
So they're trying to shoehorn it in and everything. Yes. They talk about the books and the deleted scenes and things that we've missed, and this is not an alien, it's a... Neo.
Oh yeah, it's whatever. Not a xenomorph.
Not a xenomorph. It's a neomorph. It's a protomorph or whatever. I'm just like, shut up. Whatever. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be anything. Whatever. You guys don't have to. Anyway, so I watch and I have all this this knowledge now in my head because I've watched these guys and gals talk about the history of the Alien franchise and what the mythology is and. I don't, people like, Prometheus is so underrated. It was such a great movie. I'm like, it is not. Can we? Okay. It's not a great movie. Can we? There's a whole bunch of characters in there that just are there. They don't even. they may die, and you're like, I don't even remember seeing that person.
Right?
before.
Yeah.
There's a geologist who is on a foreign planet.
Yes.
Who's like, I'm only a geologist. I've got no reason to be here. I'm going back to the ship. Are you joking? Do you know? Have you ever met a geologist?
Right.
Have you ever gone on a hike outside on the planet Earth with a frickin' geologist? Because let me tell you something, son. You're not going very far on this hike because you only taking every couple of steps. They're going to pick up a rock and tell you about it. There is no chance this guy is on a foreign planet and is like, I got nothing to do here. Are you kidding me? He wouldn't have made it 5 steps outside of the ship.
That would be a reasonable thing to have said, that he didn't go with the rest of the group because he could only take a maximum of 5 steps in 5 hours because he's got so many things to look at within those 5 feet.
He's just sitting there up next to where the landing gear is, just pulling
would have
things
been
out of the
plausible,
ground.
and I would have believed it, and it could have served the same function. Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many characters that are in here that you just... Like, I'm captain. Like, why do you have a name? Like, what is even the point of you? Right? And
but Michael Fassbender's great. And it looks great. And it sounds great.
And if you look at the deleted scenes, you're like, we could have used these scenes.
Sure.
These, like, you get rid of the extra people. Like, don't put 17 people on the ship. Don't have to give them 5 seconds of dialogue time. Sure. Just put, like, the 3 or 4 people who are, you're like, I'm not sending, we're spending $1 trillion to send people over here to find this alien species. We gotta save some money somehow. Don't make a smaller ship, and we'll put fewer people on it, and then we could do the deleted scene. There's so much that doesn't make any sense. Like, and then people come to conclusions like, this is how this is happening. This is why they're doing this. This is a military installation. Really? You just looked around this planet that you've never been to before and decided this is a military?
It helped inform the audience.
The info dump in this, it's not a good movie. Okay. There's
Fair
just
enough.
no getting around it. It's not a good. What it is it's probably would have been a good 2 or 3 movies if you had actually spent the time getting to know the characters and explaining, having them discover things normally and everything else.
Well,
it would
Ridley
have been
Scott
boring.
did want to make a trilogy, but things got in the way. So
yeah, well, his writing, no offense. I mean, this thing is awful. It is. It is just not. It is not great because you're sitting here, and I couldn't even figure out what the lady scientist, whose name I can't remember, and she's the main character.
Yeah.
What does she do? What's her science?
I can't remember.
You don't know because you meet her and she's digging through rocks and she's looking at cave paintings and then she walks onto a ship and goes, I recognize this piece of technology, which is clearly a medical piece of technology that I already know how to use.
Maybe she's an anthropologist. That would make sense.
But what? And she knows everything.
Sure.
She's like, and you don't need to. This is a scientific expedition. You don't need to bring any weapons. And now you're a military expert as well. I mean, she's just and it's nothing against her as the actor or whatever. She's just given the lines as they were wrote, and I understand that. But it doesn't. Like, what are you? And the other guy he's like, there's no engineers here that we're gonna meet. I'm just gonna start getting drunk.
Yeah.
Why is there even alcohol on this ship? Why would you send alcohol
alien
this far?
Universe. Yeah. Let's crack on because we got oodles of questions to get to, and I want to get to them earlier than we normally do these days.
Look forward to my review of Covenant, which I don't think I've watched, by the way. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I like how the end of Prometheus, they're like, and by the way, don't forget, this is an alien movie. Bam! That's alien.
Right. Well, I mean, that was kind of meant to be a bit of a surprise, but yeah.
Surprise! This movie sucked, and you waited for an alien the entire time.
It'll be interesting what you think of Romulus, because I like Romulus.
All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that basically bags on Ridley Scott. I like Ridley Scott. Okay. I mean, he's made some phenomenal movies. Okay, it's okay. Yes. I've made things. I've done things. I've made things. Afterwards, I went, that wasn't so good. It's okay to not be perfect. You can like a person and some of their content.
Ridley Scott isn't the problem. It's all the weirdos online on both sides. They're the problem.
Just like, oh my god, this thing is so criminally underrated. This is such a great movie.
That's not Ridley Scott to himself doing all that nonsense.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's get going.
Podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your question answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, find our episodes, our show notes, our Flickr album, so you can follow along with the pictures that we will be referring to. We've got older episodes as well, of course. You can't comment because the internet's awful. Sorry, guys. You guys have ruined it. It wasn't me. I don't make awful
YouTube ain't helping
comments.
that cause. That's for darn sure.
That's for sure. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can leave your comments as much as you want.
See how long I'm willing to tolerate leaving them up there. That's the new game.
I keep telling Rob to ignore them. Just let them sit there.
Oh, and most of them I do, but some of them just like, no, not inviting that into my life in any way, shape, or form.
Do what I do. Don't ever read them. Your life, you'd be surprised how wonderful your life can be if you ignore all the negative stuff around you. News? What's news? Contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His socials is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. I want to thank our listeners of the week. Go, one of the ways you can support us is financially, of course. We would love that. You go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. You can leave us a PayPal donation, which Andrew did this week. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you so much for that PayPal donation. Really appreciate that.
We also have our patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Patreon's a service where you sign up to become a monthly contributor to the podcast. We have 133 patrons, which is up from last episode.
It is. Nice. Yeah.
Usually at the beginning of the month we lose them, but
that's right.
Beginning of this month we did not. So 133 patrons over at patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Once again, the place to go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to. So big thanks to our 133 patrons over there.
Well, I guess Joe sent Rob an Amazon Canada gift card in return for some one-on-one advice. So thank you very much, Joe.
That's right. Yeah, Joe had some very specific, just to him questions that he was like, this would be like take up a lot of time on the podcast. It wouldn't be germane to too many other people's setups. Although some of it I wouldn't mind talking about, but I'm sure we'll get an opportunity at some point. Somebody else ask a similar question. So Joe, thank you very much for the Amazon gift card. That was very nice compensation for a little one-on-one time.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through, I guess, me being mean to Ridley Scott and him probably at home right now. That's the only
negative
crying
thing in the world right now.
That's it. He's in his bathtub with the shower running.
That'll
sitting
do
there.
It. Tom on this podcast. Yeah.
Tom on this podcast.
That's
Ridley, it's okay. I still love you.
Yes.
I wonder what he goes by. Do you think he goes by Ridley?
No, I
think he goes by Lee?
Mr. Scott.
Your Highness?
Could be.
Notes of gratitude from Martin, David, who listens at 1.3 times speed, but that still counts as a 2-hour plus club, right? Nope.
I mean, some of our episodes are long enough that even at 1.3 times speed, it'll be 2 hours. So yes, I see. As long as you listen all the way to the end, that's the secret.
Joe, Billy, Sasi, Gurinder, who says, after our waveforming interview, Rob is going to hop on an SVS sale to add 2 more subs to his pair of PC-13 Ultras. Rob can't barely get into his room as it is.
It's literally true. I have to squeeze by the edge of my chair and subwoofer in order just to get into the seats. And I'm only getting fatter as I get older, so that's not getting any easier. I'm going to have to get a bigger room at some point. But only if I get a bigger room will I have more subwoofers.
Andy, Stan, and Dazz. Dazz ended up treating himself to Alien Romulus at his local Dolby Cinema all by himself, since his wife doesn't do horror movies. His kids aren't particularly invested in the Alien franchise. I wonder why. He largely agreed with Rob's take, especially David Johnson's standout performance. But he noted that his Dolby Cinema location had the volume turned up to 11. It was uncomfortably loud, and he thought that was responsible for the dialogue being difficult to discern. He also hated the obviously CGI character that Rob didn't mention at all. How is it that in 2024 we're still getting effects that look so much worse than stuff from the 90s? He gives the movie a B+. So
there you go.
Notes of gratitude from Martin, David, Joe, Billy, Sasi, Gurinder, Andy, Stan, and Dazz. Thank you for thanking us.
That's right. Yeah, lots of Patreon support, lots of gratitude support. So that's very nice. Thank you, Martin, David, Joe, Billy, Sasi, Gurinder, Andy, Stan, and Dazz. Really appreciate those notes of gratitude and encouragement. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news, Infinite Gary, this comes from Infinite Gary, Lumagen might be the last one to officially announce it, but just like Mad VR and Kaleidoscape, they've been working on a less expensive option for their outboard video processors, and now they've shared the details just ahead of CEDIA 2024. You want to know why these people are all doing that? It's because they've run out of people to sell their stuff to.
Yeah, got to grow the market.
I think all the rich people have already bought it, so now they need to start selling to the poors.
Well, you'll see just how less expensive we're talking about here in a moment.
So the new Lumagen Radiance Pro 4140 video processor comes in two varieties, a $5,500 version with a single 18 gigabits per second HDMI 2.0 input and a single 9 gigabits per second HDMI output, or a $6,000 version with a single 18 gigabits per second HDMI 2.0 input and a single 18 gigabits per second
output.
Gigabits,
yeah.
Right? HDMI output.
Yes.
I've said it so many times that
right.
now it doesn't look right.
So the $5,500 less expensive version, 18 gigs in, but only 9 gigs out. Not even 10.2. 9 gigs out, half the bit rate. So that's your 4K 24 solution there, because even at 4K 60, you're going to have to do some chroma subsampling with only 9 gigs out. The 18 in, 18 out, that's just straight up HDMI 2.0 in and out, but it's only a single input. This is not an HDMI switch.
So they're offering the 1818 version for $5,500 during the introductory period until the end of the year. Too bad if you want HDMI 2.1. The new 4140 doesn't do anything that Lumagen's previous models can't do, and even that $5,500, which is $1,000 less than the MSRP of the 4240, which has 2 HDMI inputs and 1 output, it feels like 4141. Is the way it should go, because it's 1 and 1, but then they just okay, whatever. But it's more expensive than the current street price of the 4240, so instant discount? I don't know.
Yeah, it would seem weird. Like, it doesn't have any feature advantages, so why would you pay more for the brand new unit that's $5,500 for 1 input, 1 output with limited bandwidth on that 1 output, when you could spend less right now for the 4240, which is 2 inputs? At least you get 2 port switching and 18 gigabits in and out on the 4240. So yeah, strange pricing right off the bat.
So Lumagen has now added the same trick that some HD Fury devices can do, which is to take low latency Dolby Vision signals and convert them into HDR10 signals that projectors can understand and display. Mm-hmm. They're also promising a future don't buy things based on
promises. That's right.
Yeah, promising a future firmware upgrade that will add deep integration with Seymour Screen Elegance motorized masking excellence.
Seymour Screen Excellence. That's the company name. Yeah.
Motorized masking projection screens. All Lumagen video processors can already automatically detect the aspect ratio of whatever you're watching, but with the future upgrade, they'll be able to directly control the motorized masking on Seymour Screen Excellence screens so that your projection screens, oh my god, so many screens in one sentence, masking perfectly matches the contact aspect ratio automatically. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool, actually.
That is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. I will give them that. If it happens, which it has not happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet. That's right. Promises. Yeah.
Lumagen also has their Gen Lock feature that promises perfect lip sync for every video. And of course, they have their own frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR10 signals that can be very helpful for many projectors. Mm-hmm. They'll be demonstrating the 4140 at CEDIA and shipping soon. Yay.
That's the 4140. I don't know why you'd buy it.
I don't either. And just announced before our recording time at the other end of the scale, Lumagen also announced their 8K ArtisaN.
Yeah, it's a big N. Although the logo is just all capital letters, so I don't know. But in the press release, it's a capital A at the beginning and a capital N at the end and small letters in between. Inconsistent.
Outboard video processor. As the name implies, this is their first HDMI 2.1 offering with full support of 8K 60 and 4K 120 signals. All the same features as the Radiance Pro models, but now at higher resolution and frame rates. It's priced at $13,000 and will start shipping sometime in early 2025. There'll also be a trade-in program for existing Lumagen Radiance Pro owners. So there you go.
I mean, at that amount of money, you could just buy a JVC projector. Get your 4K 120 inputs with frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that way.
But I love my projector.
Well,
I just love it so much.
You know, I mean, the JVCs don't have all the lumens, so maybe you're getting a much higher lumen projector, and you need that outboard video processing. But if you don't need all the lumens, I'd take that $13,000 and just buy a whole new projector rather than a video processor for your current projector that doesn't have the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, which is the main thing you would be buying a Lumagen Radiance for. Is that a contact from your car that's going on over there, Tom? Because I can read the next news story if you're busy.
Doesn't look like it. Denon announced a new AV receiver model that has a slightly confusing model number and comes tantalizing close to being what Rob has wanted Denon to add to their lineup for years.
Well,
I did that part.
A couple of years at this point, yes.
But sadly falls just short.
Mm-hmm.
Disappointing Canadian is like the saddest thing you can do, by the way.
Isn't it, though? I mean, I will apologize.
They're so nice about it. They're like, oh, you tried really hard, and I really appreciate you. I appreciate you.
It's so darn close.
It's so darn close. So Denon announced their wait a second. The new AVR-A10H is priced at $4,700 and sits between the $3,500 6800H and the $6,500 A1H. So this is A10H or A10H.
That's right. Yeah.
Whatever. So the 10 is lower than the 1, but whatever. Shut up.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure why they went with this naming convention, but yes, A10H.
Well, they couldn't go 2.
No, they couldn't, because that would be above A1.
They could go O1, because then people would have just said 1. So maybe they should have just gone AOH, A0H.
I don't know.
Anyway,
they could have added it as an X series. It could have been an X7800. That would have worked.
There you go. Inside is a very similar design to the A1H with a huge EI. It's an I. Is that I?
It is an I, yeah. EI transformer.
Yeah. EI transformer, a robust HDMI 2.1 board with lots of cooling on it, and all the amplifier boards placed on either side of the chassis with large heat sinks and fans. Only click on when necessary, blowing air up from the bottom. Mm-hmm. As you might be able to guess from the price point, where the 6800H has 11 amplifiers built in, the A1H has 15 amplifiers built in. Can we do the math? The new A10H has 13 amps built in. They're rated to deliver 150 watts per channel, 2 channels driven. But unfortunately, they didn't do what Rob was hoping for. The A10H is not a case where there are 13 amps built in, but can process and run 15 speakers if you simply add 2 channels of external amplification. No, the A10H is really a direct replacement of the aging X8500H and its 13 amps built-in amps go along with a maximum of 13 speakers in use at a time. So,
yeah. So, I mean, what I was hoping for, because, I mean, the A1H, I'd love to have that AV receiver, but it's, $6,500 MSRP. It can be found for a little bit less than that these days, but it's still, up around that $6,000 price mark for the A1H. And that gives you full, 15 channel support, 9.4, because they can do 4 independent subwoofers, .6, right? That'd be wonderful. I love that idea. I was like, could we get what we've had in many other instances, which is you have fewer built-in amplifiers, but you have the pre-outs present so that you could do 15 channels of processing. You just don't have 15 channels of amplification built in. Could there be a model that sits between the 6800H that can process 13 channels and power 11 of them itself? You have to add at least a 2-channel external amplifier to get to 13, but it has that option. Something in between that and the 15-channel with 15 amplifiers built in A1H. So I'm like, let's get a 7800H, or now they've called it A10H. And it's like, yeah, we got the 13 channels of amplification built in. We got the 15 channels of pre-out physical connections, but it isn't doing the 15-channel processing. I'm like, so
I think
close.
what we've discovered here is that amplifiers are cheap. Okay, that's what it comes down
now,
to.
yeah.
And that, adding the amplifier channels in is not as expensive as giving it more processing power. And that's what it's really coming down to. They could have even stuck with 11 amps built in with you can process up to 15.
Yes.
And
I totally would have taken
that.
I totally would have taken that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can physically connect 15 speakers. There are enough binding posts and pre-outs for that, but only 13 of them will be active at any given time. The extra 2 connections just allow you to run slightly different speaker configurations for, say, Atmos or a 3D.
Yeah.
You should not do that though. Or a 3D. All of the immersive audio formats are supported: Dolby Atmos, DTS-X Pro, IMAX Enhanced, Aura 3D, and even Sony 360 spatial audio. I guess there's some Sony fans who are really excited about that.
Yeah.
The height 4 connections are shared, with also being the front wide connections, and there are the 4 independent subwoofer pre-outs that have become somewhat standard on Denon's higher end models. No XLR connections anywhere to be found, which is fine. So the A10H remains easy to tell apart from the back, and just like all of Denon's current upper tier models, the A10H comes with Odyssey Multi-EQ XC32 and the Odyssey microphone, but you have the option of paying extra to upgrade to Odyssey Multi-EQ X or Dirac, including the option to have Dirac Live bass control. No Dirac Art yet, though. You'll have to provide your own microphone in order to use Dirac, as you do with everybody else. So there you go.
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting any new receiver models from Denon, but yeah, so pleasantly surprised there. I just wish it had been 13 amps built in and 15 channel processing. Oh well, and that will not be a firmware update. There's no way they can add that in the future.
Right.
That's on the chips.
It would do it. Yes,
that's right.
That's done. Questions. Brad has an Onkyo RZ50 receiver, which can power 9 speakers on its own and process up to 11, but at the moment, he's only running a 5.1 configuration. The room is quite large, it's about 16 feet wide and 26 feet long. He's only using the front half as his theater area, and it sits about 10 feet from the front wall. He didn't bother with surround back speakers given the arrangement, and despite the room being very large, there are limitations on where he can place speakers, so his surrounds are pretty much straight to the sides at 90 degrees. There are limitations as to where speakers can go overhead as well, including a ceiling fan, so we'd like to ask. He knows he can definitely find a spot to put 2 overhead speakers for Atmos, but putting 4 speakers on the ceiling might be a bit of a challenge and require putting the speakers in positions that don't perfectly adhere to Dolby's placement guidelines. Should he stop at 2 overhead speakers, or is it only worth doing overheads if he does 4? So I don't see any reason why you can't do front heights instead, because you are.
Well, I mean, he definitely can do front heights.
Yeah, and then if you can put 2 overhead speakers, then you've got heights and middles.
Yeah.
Depending on where you can place them. So I think you can do 4.
Yep.
I don't know why you couldn't do 4. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the AV receiver is already ready to go, so there's no upgrade price that you have to pay to get the AV receiver that can do 4 overhead speakers, because sometimes that's the case for people, right? Like they have a 2700H or a 2800H or something from Denon, and they're like, yeah, that can do 2 overheads, but do I really only want to do it if I can do 4, and that means buying a whole new AV receiver. But in your case, with an Onkyo RZ50, that side of things is already ready to go.
Right.
My general feeling is, yeah, if you're gonna do Atmos, if you're gonna go to the trouble of installing some speakers above you, I like to have the full steering arrangement. I like to be able to have those sounds move side to side and front to back. And it doesn't have to perfectly adhere to Dolby's placement guidelines. If you're vaguely above to the left and in front, above to the left and behind, above to the right and in front, above to the right and behind, like if you're just vaguely in that zone,
right,
you'll get the idea. When sounds are moving front to back above you, when they're moving side to side above you, you'll get that effect. But you won't get that effect. You won't get the front to back effect if you only have 2 speakers above you. So yeah, if you're very limited in terms of what can go on your ceiling, and I totally understand that, then I like Tom's idea that, yeah, you have a pair of speakers that are on your ceiling somewhere above you, be that directly overhead or slightly behind you, like whatever.
If you can cheat them behind you, that's what I would do. And
even just a little bit.
I'll tell you right now, if I had any motivation whatsoever, which I do not, I would take my top middles that I have here, I would cheat them back a couple of feet if I could.
Right.
And then just call them, whatever, front heights, rear heights,
top
or
rears,
whatever.
Yeah,
I would just call them whatever that I could call them, and not really care about how off they are, because I don't think it makes that much of a difference in what you hear. So yeah, I think you can do it, man. I think you can do it.
So as far as on the ceiling, that's what we do. And then front heights on the front wall, high up on the front wall, that gives you the 4, and it gives you the front to back and the side to side.
Yes. Martin has a new house.
We didn't get the second question there.
There was another question.
There's another part. Yeah.
If he goes with just 2 overhead speakers, where should they go? Don't go with 2. So there we go. As close to directly above his seats as top middles, or is it better to have them some distance in front of the seats? They wouldn't go somewhere behind the seats if they were only overhead pair, right? I would do top middles. If you're only going to go with 2, you go top middles. I mean, that's the end of that.
Agreed. And actually, that's in line with Dolby's recommendations as well. They say if you only have 2 overhead speakers, you do not have 4 in any form or fashion, then go with top middles. That's their recommendation. And we like that idea too, because then you have the option of adding front heights in the future, and you're not having, 4 speakers that are all some distance in front of you. Now you have front heights and top middles, which is a perfectly reasonable arrangement and still gives you some front to back movement.
All right, you go to the next question. I
certainly will. Back. Alrighty. So let's do the whole video transition thing too, just so we're not looking at an empty seat over there next to Tom. We'll move on to Martin. Martin has a new house being built with a living room that will also be the home theater. He's fairly set on the distances and setup that he wants. He'll be going for a 16:9 aspect ratio, acoustically transparent projection screen from Seymour AV. He's going with their 120 inches wide, because Seymour specs all their screens by the width of the screen rather than the diagonal. But 120 inches wide, 16:9 aspect ratio is about 137.5, 138 inches diagonal. So, pretty close to the 135 inches that we see from a lot of others, but ever so slightly larger. The projector is going to be ceiling mounted and about 20 feet away from the screen. It'll be 9 feet off of the floor, so he wants to make sure that the zoom range and the lens shift range are going to be able to accommodate that, of course. So, he's been happy with the Epson 5030 UB that he's been using on his current 120-inch screen. So a little bit smaller screen size and an older projector, but he's been happy with that. In their place, they mostly watch movies and sports, and while the new room they're going to be in will have some amount of light control, it can be made dark, but it won't be absolutely pitch black, and the room isn't completely blacked out. It's not a bat cave, but he does have some light control. They can make the room dark overall. So with the larger screen size and wanting to try out HDR, Martin would like to get a projector upgrade. He's looking somewhere in the $4,000 to $5,000 price range, and he's a bit concerned about light output capability since he's going to that larger screen size. So which model of projector would we recommend? To me, this feels fairly cut and dry. I do think at the screen size that you're talking about, and with having darkness but not full light control, I think sticking with Epson makes a lot of sense. You're definitely going to have the zoom range and the lens shift range that you need. That's going to be super easy. You're already going to be familiar with their menu structure from the 5030 UB, so that's going to be nice in terms of setup. It'll make it a bit easier for you. And I would be pointing you to either the Epson Home Cinema LS11000 or the Epson Pro Cinema LS12000. Those are based on the same platform. The chassis look the same, except that the Home Cinema 11,000 is a white chassis and the Pro Cinema 12,000 is a black chassis. But other than that, things are very similar. Inside, there are 1080p LCD panels, but they wobble those panels 4 times per frame and at a rate of 240 hertz. So these are projectors that will show you the full 4K resolution, which your 5030 UB could not do. All the 4K pixels really do exist and are on screen. They're just having to be wobbled 4 times per frame to make that happen, but it's fast enough it can do that to up to 4K 120. So you're ready for HDMI 2.1, high-end gaming, high frame rates, and the input lag, if you are a gamer, is below 20 milliseconds. So it's very impressive what it can do 4K-wise. These are laser-driven projectors. And the difference, performance-wise, the LS11000 comes in at the $4,000 price point, and it's actually on sale right now for $3,500. So it's definitely going to be affordable if you go that route with the white outer casing. And the Pro Cinema 12,000 is priced at $5,000. So also within your price point, but right at the top of it. Now, the Pro Cinema 12,000 comes with a Chief ceiling mount, so that is worth something. It's also a 3-year warranty instead of a 2-year warranty on the 11,000. And under the Pro Cinema line, they have their rapid replacement program. So if anything goes wrong, they send you a replacement immediately. It usually arrives in 1 or 2 days. You get the box that came in and you ship back your faulty unit. Whereas the Home Cinema, it's sort of a standard warranty procedure that goes on along there. If you're not thinking about using an anamorphic lens, but the 12,000 supports anamorphic lenses, the 11,000 doesn't. Now, They're spec'd slightly different in terms of maximum light output. The 11,000 is spec'd at 2,500 lumens. The 12,000 is spec'd at 2,700 lumens, which is brighter than like what you would get for the close to $5,000 JVC. One of the reasons I'm suggesting these Epsons. But in practice, the light output is equal. There's really no difference. And the natural picture mode, out of all the picture modes available, is the most accurate out of the box and really does not require a calibration. I mean, if you want perfection, fine, professional calibration, but it's fantastic out of the box. They don't have frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping like JVC does, but they do have a 16-point slider that you can adjust. And instead of a dynamic iris, like you have on your 5030 UB, they have a dynamic laser. So the laser can brighten and lower. And it's worth having that dynamic laser activated, and it's worth having adjusting that slider, although the setting of 8 right in the middle is right for most movies, and there's sort of a gamma adjustment, a dynamic gamma adjustment, which again, setting it at 8 right in the middle tends to work best, but you have the latitude there to adjust. If a movie just looks too dark overall in HDR or too bright overall, everything is blown out to white, you can adjust those sliders on a movie basis and get that all working. So the difference is in the black level. The LS12000 does have deeper outright black level that they claim a doubling of contrast, but of course that's going from 0.002 black on the 11,000 to 0.001 black on the 12,000. And in your room that isn't completely light controlled, the 11,000 saving you $1,000. If you already have a ceiling mount that works for your 5030 UB, it'll work for your 11,000 as well. You can save a bunch of money there. You're not going to notice the performance hit. The only difference might be the white chassis if you do want the upgraded chief mount that comes with the 12,000 and the longer and better warranty on the Pro. So there's reasons you might go with the 12,000, but honestly, if you decided to save the money and go with the Epson Home Cinema LS11000, I think that one will serve you really, really well.
Mark says he's been listening to our podcast for about a year now, and this is his first time writing in. When he was 14, he mowed lawns for an entire summer and used the money to buy his very first speaker upgrade. Up to that point, he had a pair of very old Sony speakers, but after that summer, he was rocking a pair of NHT Super Zeros, along with a pair of NHT SW2 subs. Nice. 30 years have gone by, and a good chunk of that time was spent in his local home theater store. When any of his dream gear pieces would come along, he'd score a deal on the demo units or used equipment, and that let him cycle through pre-pros and amps from the likes of Lexicon, Proceed, and Rotel. A while ago, when he was living in Chicago, he bought a house with an unfinished basement. By this point, his home theater gear consisted of an Anthem D2V Pre-Pro, Proceed HPA2 and HPA3 amps, 5 Teal speakers, a pair of large CS 2.3 towers, a pair of smaller CS 1.6 towers, and an MCS1 center, and a JL Audio Fathom F113 sub, and an Arkham CD player. He still has some Nordis cables he scored from that home theater store, but anything new he needed came from Monoprice or Blue Jeans, and while he's still rocking the custom home theater PC he built, pretty much everything else gets played from his Apple TV 4K. For a long time, the dream had been to build a room within a room, and since they'd picked a home with 9-foot ceilings in the basement, this was his chance. It took a long time. In addition, this is just a flex. Is this what I'm reading? We're just flexing now?
He sent in a very long email. Believe it or not, this is condensed. Tom's going to be mad. There's an awful lot to read from Mark here, but
I'm not mad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and I'm not even really, I'm not really bitter or insulting him in any way, shape, or form, but it is a flex, and it's fine.
Well, sure, that's part of the fun of home theater.
I think part of is being able to tell people who actually know what the hell you're talking about.
That's right. It's sharing in the little bit of gear lust. That's why I'm not going to admit all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that this is. I mean, we're going full hog here.
We're learning Mark's history, and it's going to be germane to the advice he wants to give. He
fell into the audio file hole, and then he kind of clawed his way back out. Now he's talking about a room within a room. I like it. All right. It took a long time, and in addition to the home theater, the formerly unfinished basement was turned into a dedicated home office, a playroom, and it also has a full bathroom, which is also really nice when you have a home theater.
Yep.
Have the bathroom nearby. He used a home theater book as a guide with the goal of making the basement home theater very comfortable in terms of temperature, very quiet and well treated on the inside, and soundproof from the outside, and with all the equipment hidden out of sight. Mm-hmm. He used the technique of adhering a rigid installation board to all of the exposed concrete, including the floor, which provided a complete thermal break and eliminated the need for a vapor barrier. I'll have to take your word on that. I know nothing about these things. Subfloor was laid on top of the non-compressible foam, and the 2x4 wall framing was only secured to that subflooring, not to any of the house's existing construction. A double 2x4 frame separated the only shared wall from the playroom, and new ceiling joists were interleaved in between the existing joists, with the new joist only secured to the new wall framing. In other words, none of the theater's framing is physically attached to any of the house's construction.
That is a room within a room.
That's how you define that.
Yep.
Any necessary bulkheads or soffits were boxed out. Flexible ducting was used for HVAC, with a dedicated air return installed on the opposite side of the room to promote maximum airflow and reduce noise transmission via the air return. Everything was insulated, and dedicated electrical circuits were installed with lots of outlets. He had grand plans for double drywall with green glue, a double set of French doors, and all solid core naturally, and fully constructed ISO boxes for anything installed in the ceilings or walls. But we all know what happens when it comes to the best laid plans. With the entire basement renovation nearing completion, a new job opportunity became available to him, and he just couldn't pass it up. The catch? It would mean moving to the other side of the country and be moving out of his dream home in just a few months.
That's right. Yeah, that's tough when that comes along. All this work going in, and like, oh, and now we're leaving this house in a few months.
Rather than leave the basement partially unfinished, he decided to switch gears, making it into a totally finished and usable room for the new owners, but not put the full time and expense into his grand soundproofing plan. So in went the normal junction boxes for the ceiling and walls, not ISO boxes. Up went a single layer of regular drywall, finished and painted, and in went a single set of French doors with glass panels, the way most people prefer. They were still able to enjoy the home theater he had built for a couple of months before they moved, and the total experience taught him a lot. And I could have told you this before I was thinking it as I was reading it, and I kind of skimmed the next paragraph as I was reading the other stuff, and I'm telling you, this is like I am so lazy. You guys do not understand how lazy I am, and when things like this happen, and I'm like, my laziness is justified, it does not make me a better person. It makes me a worse one. So it turned out he and his family were completely satisfied with the level of soundproofing they ended up with. He considers himself a perfectionist. He could put on a loud action movie at nearly cinema reference volume and only hear the slightest bit of playroom in the playroom directly outside the theater, or in his family room directly above the theater. Nothing at all in the bedroom upstairs. He had also run corrugated tubing as conduit from the theater to a closet where he kept all of his gear, and having nothing but the TV and front speakers visible was the coolest in his family's opinion. And having total control over the lights was exactly what he wanted. So in his experience, it really is the decoupling that makes the biggest difference. He's seen the extent that a lot of home theater enthusiasts go to, and all of the extra mass, installation time, and expense only results in the last few percentage points in terms of soundproofing results. It's another case of diminishing returns. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second because we're about to get into his questions.
That's right.
This home theater, this is home theater. This is audio in general. In video to a certain extent, but mostly audio. You can get so far close to perfection with 10% of the time, effort, and money, and then have people online tell you that what you have is crap and it doesn't really work, and you need to spend the other 90% to get that extra 0.1% of performance. That is what he's describing here. The decoupling, which is expensive, don't get me wrong. It's expensive.
And it necessarily costs you some square footage, right? Not piles and piles and piles, but it does cost you some square footage. If you're going to do double studs, or at the very least staggered studs, he sort of has a staggered ceiling, right? Because he interleaved new joists that are a little bit lower than the existing joists, but he had 9 feet to begin with, so he could raise the floor a bit, he could lower the ceiling a bit, and still end up with 8 feet inside, or maybe slightly more than 8 feet. So, I mean, there's a lot of caveats here, right? Because if you're starting with an unfinished basement, but it's already like, there's many basements where before it's even finished, you're at 7.5 feet, right? With the exposed joists and the concrete floor. Once you finish that, you're basically at 7 feet with just normal finishing. So not everybody has the starting point where this is even a possibility to do this level of decoupling. But I agree, because it's the base. It's the base that bothers people, right? It's not that difficult to block treble. If you can seal the room, you've blocked the treble. You don't have to add piles of mass and piles of damping to block treble. It's not that difficult. It's really about flanking pads when it comes to treble. If you're going to hear voices and treble, it's flanking pads. It's the air seal of the room that you have to worry about. But for bass, it's the decoupling. That's the thing that makes the real difference. Now, if you didn't want to hear a peep in the playroom directly on the other side of the door, if you didn't want to hear a peep in the family room above, that's where the second layer of drywall with the green glue comes into play. And some people, that's what they're after, and so it can be justified. But I agree. There are diminishing returns, and it is a lot more expense and time spent on doing all that.
And when we talk about reviews of speakers or headphones or whatever, right? When we talk about these reviews, the reason we should be trusting professional reviewers like myself more than random people on the internet who decided that that these are the best headphones they've ever heard, is because they have the ability to compare experiences. And it doesn't have to be an A/B shootout, blind, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Right? If he had done all the things, right? Where would he have said was the big difference maker? Yeah. He would have no idea. And in fact, in many ways, he still has no idea because he did a lot of stuff. Which of the things really made the difference? Well, upstairs, and to a certain extent, a lot of it, just the decoupling of of making sure that everything was decoupled was the big thing. But what if he had what if he hadn't done the ceiling part?
Or what if he hadn't done the insulation in all of the wall, like the interior wall insulation? What if that wasn't there? Yeah.
So if he had done everything, including the green glue and everything, he might be going, the green glue made it. I've got green glue up in my home. This is what people do, by the way.
I mean, the results would have been fantastic.
I've got green glue and 2 layers of drywall in my home theater, and it's absolutely silent outside, and nobody can hear anything. Everybody like, oh my God, this green glue stuff is awesome. But what he doesn't tell you, and I'm not saying that he would have done this, but people do this all the time, is, and also I decoupled the entire room, and it's a room within a room, and all these other things.
I mean, I will say, if it's a matter of price more than it is square footage and all that type of stuff, if you had to make a choice between, like, I can't do full double stud walls, but I can do either sound clips and hat channels with a single layer of drywall, or I can put 2 layers of drywall with green glue directly on the existing studs, I would choose the decoupling. I would choose the sound clips and hat channels
10 times out of 10
over the single layer of drywall. So that's where we land on that.
Yeah. So this is good. I think
it sure
for
is.
People to hear that.
That's why I included it all, Tom.
Yeah. He's got a couple of questions, though. He never went down the route of using a Harmony remote. He's never tried a Sofa Baton X1 or X1S. He went through several Philips Pronto remotes, but then he switched to entirely software-based solutions using an iPhone or a tablet to control everything. These days, though, virtually everything is played through his Apple TV 4K, and since they're almost never switching inputs, and all that really needs to be controlled on a day-to-day basis is power on, power off, and volume, and cursor control, obviously.
Well, sure. Yeah.
His family is happy just using the Apple TV remote. Nothing
as far
else.
As devices other than the Apple TV 4K, though, like what else needs to be controlled? Power on for the display, power on for the Pre-Pro, and then volume on the Pre-Pro. Yeah.
Right. So he's accepted having HDMI-CEC turned on in order to make that work. When he does need to make any changes that are more complicated or dig into any settings, he relies on the HomeRemote.com app installed on the old iPhone. It can be programmed to fully control just about anything directly over IP. And for any devices that don't offer IP-based controls, you can use an Ethernet to IR adapter from Global Cache to send those commands. The home remote used to be free, but now it costs $5. The Global Cache converters are anywhere from $50 to $150, depending on exactly what you need. But he never needs to worry about a hub or a Logitech eventually ending support or the frustrations he's read from some Sofa Baton owners. He will admit you need a lot of patience to get the home remote all set. Yeah, he doesn't want to go through the hassle of whatever, but he had to get a master's degree in
Well, actually, you'll find out what he does for a living in just a second.
You need a lot of patience to get the home remote all set up the way you want. He's a mechanical engineer, so it might not be fair to expect everyone to find it as reliable as he did once he had it all done to his liking. So he understands that some people simply don't want to use a phone or a tablet and prefer physical buttons, but that's what the Apple TV remote provides. He's heard us suggest a sofa baton to folks looking for a universal remote these days. What about his combo solution? It costs less and it can do more. No.
I mean, I have mentioned the home remote, although, I mean, he said he's only been listening for about a year, and I think it was prior to that. It was right around the time that the Harmony remotes had just been announced as being discontinued, and the Sofa Baton X1 series didn't exist yet. So we were looking...
X1S, if you look at the Andrew's review on AV Gadgets, I mean, it is so much better than the X1 as far as getting things set up. It is a paradigm shift.
It's closer to what you were used to with the Harmony of you pretty much just put in the brand, and then you can either just go through a nice list of models that they didn't have before. They didn't have a list for you to look through before and browse. You had to search, and on the X1, you had to search very specifically. You basically had to find the full model number on Amazon.com and copy all of that in to really get things working properly on the X1. But the X1S has definitely improved all of that setup. But yeah, I did mention the home remote back then when we were looking for any and every possible alternative to the Harmony because it had just been discontinued, and the home remote was definitely one to consider. But I mean, yeah, it's the same thing. It is IP control by itself. It's only IP control. There's plenty of devices that don't do IP control, but they'll do Bluetooth, or they don't do IP control, but they'll do IR. You need those global cache or global cache, however they pronounce the company name, converters to do that. So that adds some cost. And if you have two of them, like one for Bluetooth and one for IR, now you're at the price of a Sofa Baton X1S. So it's not really less expensive if you end up needing those adapters. If you need the IR adapters in multiple rooms, right? That's another consideration that can come into things as well. So, yeah, it's not that I dislike it. The home remote is a fantastic solution that doesn't cost an arm and a leg for the software. There are other software solutions that cost a lot more. Personally, though, I just don't like using a touchscreen only device as my universal remote. That's not my preference. So I'm glad the Sofa Baton X1S exists now and is good enough. I feel fine recommending it, although I don't recommend it if you want total control over home automation. It's not there yet. It's not the equal of what the Harmony could do as far as home automation goes. And the home remote can do more on that front. So it certainly has the advantage for home automation purposes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I get what you're saying, sort of thing, like, hey, this works for me. Why doesn't it work for everybody else?
I mean, that isn't really what he's just saying. Here's an alternative. He's got personal experience, and look, if it's the right solution for somebody, that I think we have to recommend things that are a little bit more universal, if that makes sense to you. I mean, you're clearly general audience.
Yeah, I have to assume a level of ignorance that even maybe you're not even assuming at this point. And I don't mean that in any sort of bad way. You shouldn't have to know that much to get a universal remote to work. Right. You shouldn't have to have a degree or whatever.
And also, you're not at a one remote solution anymore. You're at a two remote solution. Yeah. If I want a one remote solution, then
yeah. So as mentioned, he's still got that home theater PC he built several years ago. He made backup copies of all of his discs and stored them on the NAS. As ISO files, he used Power DVD to play them back on the HDPC, and that experience provided full menus, just like putting the disc into the player, plus full audio and video quality. But since almost everything goes through his Apple TV 4K now, he quickly discovered that the only playback app that offers full lossless audio is the Infuse app. Mm-hmm. It shows full cover art and pulls in metadata, but it doesn't show the full disc menu, so it's a bit tricky to do anything other than jump straight into the movie. And some disc backups result in many, many playback files to choose from, only one of which is the entire movie in the correct order. That's a pirating thing.
It's an anti-piracy measure, yes. Lionsgate.
Yeah. In all honesty, they mostly find themselves using streaming services anyway, but when they do want to play anything off the NAS, is there a better solution that would provide the full disc experience with menus and easy access to the special features and all that, plus the full lossless audio and video quality? Okay, Rob.
Yes. So I did want to mention, even with that Infuse app on the Apple TV 4K, which we have mentioned because it's definitely the alternative to the Plex app on there. The Plex app on Apple TV 4K does not support lossless audio output, but the Infuse app does. But the Infuse app still has a limitation. He hasn't run into this because he's not running an Atmos system, but the Infuse app will not output lossless Atmos or lossless DTS-X. It'll do lossless Dolby True HD up to 7.1. It'll do lossless DTS HD Master Audio up to 7.1, but it won't pass through the Atmos or DTS-X extensions on top of those lossless formats. So there's still a limit with the Infuse app on the Apple TV 4K if you're running an immersive audio system. So the solution that I would absolutely point you to is a whole other hardware device. So what are we doing now? 3 remotes, or forcing your family to use the touchscreen to control this? Because the Apple TV 4K isn't going to control this device, but it's a Zidoo, Zidoo. It's a Zidoo player. This can absolutely connect to your NAS over the network, pull in ISO files or BDMV file folder files. Either one will work, the full disk backups, and play them exactly as if you had put a physical disk into a Blu-ray disc player. The menus show up, all of that shows up. Even the FBI warning at the beginning shows up to tell you that what you're doing is illegal. But yeah, I will say there is a huge range of Zidoo players at a huge range of price points, and they talk about all the fancy additional features that the much more expensive models offer. Completely unnecessary in your case. You don't need built-in storage options, all of the talk of AI upscaling, of course, and audio DAC upgrades and all that kind of stuff. You don't need any of that. You need an HDMI output. That's what you need, an HDMI 2.0 output at that. And so the Z9X Pro, which sells for $250, that's all you need. That's as much as you need to spend for an extra device. But it is an extra device. It means switching inputs on your display or on your pre-pro if that's where you plug it in. It means reprogramming the remote, using possibly a third remote if you don't want your family using the touchscreen. So, but that would give you the solution that you're talking about.
All right. In their new place, the home theater is also the family room. He uses Apple Home Kit to control a bunch of things in this house, including some home theater gear. Mm-hmm. Recently, Siri made just a fantastic mistake and figured that when he said to turn on the lights up to 100%, he must have meant to turn the volume on his Anthem Pre-Pro as high as it can go.
Yeah. AI, man. It just works perfectly.
His kids were watching TV at the time. The speakers went to full blast for a few seconds before he was able to run over there in a panic and press the power button to shut it off. Now he's worried if any damage was done. His teal speakers aren't in production anymore, and parts are basically impossible to come by for repairs. He has listened to the speakers, which definitely still make sound, and don't immediately sound any different to him than before. But just to be sure, what's the best way to check them for any damage that might have been done, and how could he check his Proceed amps as well? They're ready to deliver 500 watts into 4 ohm speakers, which aren't the most, into his 4 ohm speakers, which aren't the most efficient. I mean, first of all, damage to speakers is not hard to discern. Usually,
play a sweep. That's really all you need to do. Play a sweep.
And then put your ear next to every driver and make sure they're making noise when they're supposed to be making noise. If there's a problem, I mean, you might go sit down after you did that. If all the drivers are playing, great. Mm-hmm. If they all sound like they're playing a sound and not a noise.
Yes, that's right.
Kind of understand the difference there. The thing I would be worried about would be bottoming out. That could have happened, and I'd worry about a ripped surround. And both of those things are going to be fairly easy to hear.
You will hear them when you play a frequency sweep. Yeah, you can go to audiocheck.net, one of my favorite places to recommend. Just play a full frequency sweep there, or you could just go to YouTube for this purpose and just find a 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz frequency sweep and just play that through each speaker a few times, and it'll be readily apparent if any physical damage was done to any of your speakers. If the amplifiers are still
subtle, okay?
No,
it won't be subtle. If you're thinking, oh no, maybe there's a problem. No, there's no problem.
That's right. It. And if the amplifiers are still making sound come through your speakers, then nothing has been damaged. That's kind of an all or nothing on the amplifiers. It's not as though some of the frequencies in the amplifier get worse and others don't. It's like, no, it's going to be problems or not problems as far as damage goes with an amplifier.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. He's had his JL Audio Fathom F113 for several years now, scored a great deal on it, but knows about the advantages of having more than one sub. But unless he finds another great deal, he's unlikely to add a second one at a full price. I don't blame you if those things are
they're pretty cheap. Pretty pricey, those Fathoms, yeah.
The family room is 14 by 20 feet with sloped ceiling that goes from 9 to 10.5 feet. What would be a good combination, a companion subwoofer for his JL Audio? Mm-hmm. All right, so I don't remember which one the Fathom is, so it doesn't really matter. But
that's
let's
the largest of the single driver. After that, they went to the Gotham with the two 12-inch or two 13-inch drivers.
Right. Okay. So it's humongous, and it fills this room.
But it's sealed, and it's a 13-inch driver.
Yeah, you pressurize the space. So I would just not worry about getting another Phantom.
No, you don't have. It doesn't have to be identical.
I would just get a sub that can fill that space. So
Sure.
you can. We have the article in AV Gadgets, and we've talked about it here, where you can kind of put in the square footage of your room. And I would just overestimate. I would just go, it's a rectangle that's this size by the highest height, and just be like, that's the air volume of the room. And then look at the chart there, and it'll tell you which subwoofers will be. Like, people are like, oh, well, you don't want your subwoofer to be exact. Right, you want it. Not that I don't really care that much about headroom, but your room correction is going to EQ your sub,
right? Yeah,
and you may need more output. A little bit.
Yeah,
so then what you actually, then like technically the absolute limit, that this thing will say. So getting a slightly larger one is fine. Putting a slightly larger air volume in there is also fine, and that will give you a slightly over capable sub so that you have a little bit of headroom for the EQ to do its work. So Rob's going to give you some suggestions, and I'm going to link you up to that AV Gadgets article.
Yeah, also, that was our good friend Sasi who created a freely usable, free to do whatever you please with Google Docs spreadsheet. So I'll have the links to that as well if you want an interactive version. So we can have the link for that as well. If you're just talking about subwoofers you could buy today that have very similar output and extension capabilities to your Fathom F113, but from other brands at lower prices than the F113 costs at full retail. If you're looking at SVS's lineup, which of course well known for their sealed subwoofers with good output capabilities, it's a little bit of they have one that's slightly below and one that's slightly above, right? So the SB4000, which goes for $1,800, that's got a little bit less output than your F113, whereas the SB16 Ultra, their flagship sealed model in SVS's lineup, goes for $2,300 and has a little bit more output than your F113. But both of those would be very good companions, and just sort of depends on price point and maybe physical size and just how much headroom you want to have available. What's funny is if you're willing to mix sealed and ported, and there's really no reason you can't, as long as they have very similar output and extension capabilities. The output is actually very similar to HSU's VTF2 Mark V, particularly with the VTF2 Mark V in its one port open mode. And so there you're talking about much less expensive, right? You're talking about $750, I think, by the time you get a VTF2 Mark V. There's also Rhythmic's FVX12, so just a 12-inch driver there, but a ported model from Rhythmic, the FVX12. The X in their model numbers denotes ported. That's very, very similar output from a ported sub, a little bit physically larger because they are ported instead of sealed, but they're smaller drivers, so it's not like wildly different in terms of physical size, but the ported ones are a little bit bigger, but huge cost savings there. The FVX12 is right around the $1,000 mark. If you're looking for another sealed alternative that costs a little bit less than the SVS options, but comes really, really close to the output capabilities of your JL audio sub, Rhythmic's E15 HP2. There's an HP1 and HP2, but the HP2 comes really, really close. It's a 15-inch driver here rather than the 13 that you have, so the box is a little bit bigger than your Fathom, but in terms of output, it's really, really close. Depending on the finish option that you choose, it's anywhere between $1,580 to $1,800, so $1,600 to $1,800. So it's a little bit less expensive than even the SB4000 while having a little bit more output than the SB4000. It's really, really close to your Fathom. So just in terms of what's the closest, those might be the options. But you can use the tool to find one that works for your room size and then not worry.
He's used Anthem ARC Genesis, having upgraded to an Anthem AVM70 Pre-Pro now. He also has a measurement microphone and Room EQ Wizard on hand. He'd like to try taking some before and after measurements to confirm what Anthem claims ARC Genesis is doing to the sound and maybe get some other insights into his current room. He thought it would be fairly easy and straightforward, but he has run into information overload. Could we point him to a resource that will at least get him started with Room EQ Wizard measurements and instruct him as to which measurements would be the most insightful for him?
Oh boy, can we!
I've got AV Gadgets, the ultimate Room EQ Wizard tutorial, taking measurements, because that's as far as I got. Because once you get the measurements taken, then it's a matter of looking at them and knowing what you're looking at, and that's far beyond the scope of what I'm going to be able to tell you in an article. So that's going to take you a lot more. So what else you got, Rob?
I mean, we worked sort of together on that article because I, on this very podcast, had an episode where I went through a Room EQ Wizard tutorial for beginners, but don't be offended by the name. I mean, you are kind of a beginner when it comes to Room EQ Wizard specifically. So a lot of the information is shared between the AV Gadgets article if you want to read it and what I say in the video. But in the YouTube link,
Let's be honest, I just listened to the AV-Rant episode and just wrote it all down.
That'll work too.
That's basically what. So if you're like, I don't want to have to keep pausing and rewinding,
right?
Read the article.
That's it too. But in the YouTube video version, we'll have a link to that in our show notes. Of course, I do also link to some other great tutorials that go into some more things that I didn't have time to go into on our episode or just expand upon it. There's an Audioholics tutorial for getting into Room EQ Wizard that I've linked to. Home Theater Gurus have a fantastic tutorial on, okay, so you've taken the measurements, you now have figured out what you want to correct specifically in the bass with your subwoofers. You're going to go to dual subwoofers, we know, so that's going to be very germane to you. How do I actually do that? How do I take those Room EQ Wizard measurements and turn those into equalization settings for my subwoofers to correct the bass that I might have seen needs correcting now that I have graphs to look at? So there's a fantastic HD Gurus tutorial that's also linked to in that YouTube video. So go through all of those. You'll be in really good shape and you'll know what you're looking at by the end of that.
Yeah. Robert has a Marantz SR7011 AV receiver. All of its HDMI ports are 2.0A spec. Mm-hmm. He uses two of his HDMI outputs. One feeds a 75-inch Hisense LCD TV, and the other feeds a BenQ HT3550 projector. Both displays are 4K and support HDR.
Yep.
When he goes to use the projector, the Hisense TV is still plugged in, but not powered on. The projector has random dropouts.
Yeah. You are not alone.
If he unplugs the TV entirely, the projector works fine. He's tried several different HDMI cables. It's never the cables.
Well, I mean, I can't blame him because that is the.
I know
the
that's what this is the problem
scenario
with HDMI is diagnosing HDMI as like all the things you know about home theater and AV, all the things that have worked in the past. You're like, before, if it was a problem, I switched the cables out and the problem got better.
Right.
HDMI is like, 40% of the time. Sometimes 90% of the time, but mostly 60%. It just, they're just like, you're like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Try different HDMI cables, including active HDMI cable. Nothing has fixed the dropouts in the idea. Yeah, the problem is that it's basically detecting both things at the same time because turning it off doesn't really turn it off. And
even though the base capability, resolution, HDR support, there might be differences in frame rate support because the BenQ HD3550 tops out at 60 and the Hisense very well might support 120. So there could be a difference there. There could be a difference in what audio formats are supported because the BenQ probably doesn't support any audio formats, or what it can do via ARC might be different. There's these slight little differences, and there's what we call the EDID, the extended display information data that is shared between the source device, which in this case, the Marantz is acting as the source feeding the displays, but the source and the display, they share information back and forth. Here's my capabilities. And when they don't all matchy just perfectly, then you end up with these stupid dropouts that happen in HDMI. You're certainly not alone. We've come across this before. So in your scenario, happily, I don't think you need to spend any money at all because it sounds like you're not using both displays simultaneously. It sounds like, when it's projector time, and the TV's not on. When it's TV time, I turn the projector off. Maybe it's a retractable screen situation, and the TV's on, the projector's not. So you, with your Marantz and its two HDMI outputs, can just do a settings change in the Marantz. Because if you go into the settings and you go into the video section, there's the output settings submenu, and you can choose. By default, it's set to auto, right? Which is just like, okay, if both displays are going at the same time, I figure out the lowest common denominator signal that they both support, and I send that to both displays simultaneously. Or if you're using monitor 1, I send the signal to monitor 1. If you're using monitor 2, only I send the signal to monitor 2. And it sounds like that's exactly what you want. But you end up with these dropouts. One display is not powered on, it's in standby, but it's still interfering because the receiver is still receiving 2 sets of EDID and they're slightly different, and it doesn't really know what to do with that. So you can manually set it to only output to monitor 1 or to only output to monitor 2. You don't have to physically unplug anything, but that does it. Now it says, I'm not looking at 2 monitor outs anymore, only 1 at a time, and that solves this issue. Now, if I'm wrong and you actually do use both the TV and the projector simultaneously sometimes, then honestly, like, I know there's other devices, people are always looking for the less expensive solution, but I end up always coming back to HD Fury. HD Fury is what you want. You want the solution that actually works and won't deliver the dropouts anymore. And you want an HD Fury device with 2 HDMI outputs that can store and contend with 2 separate EDID sets of data.
Yeah. Derek, another first-time question asker. Derek says he's only listened to a few AVRant episodes and he's hoping we can offer an honest take about some acoustic panel questions. His main setup is in a living room, just 5.1, just. Don't ever say just on this podcast.
I mean, he you know who he's listening to online, so he feels like he's somehow inferior with 5.1. You're not, man.
Speakers,
you're way ahead of the game.
Fine.
It really is.
You're 90% of the way there, and you've only got 5 speakers and a subwoofer. Just 5.1 speakers on the TV, he says. He'd like to improve the acoustics of his room, but showed his wife some of the standard panels, and she doesn't like the look of them.
That's fair enough. I don't blame her. Yeah.
So he was browsing around Reddit and came across a post about some panels sold at Costco, $50 for 4 panels. There's a piece of felt with some wooden slats in front of them. His wife would like those, would be okay with those, and since they're so cheap, you can get like 20 of them. You have to get 20 of them. But the comments about them on Reddit are all over the place. Some people think they're great because they have no experience with anything.
That's right. Yeah.
Other people think they only affect the highest frequencies, which is true.
And those people
are mostly
correct,
a placebo.
Yeah.
He's concerned about that. So what should he do? $250, about as much as he can spend on this. So would it be even worth getting 1 or maybe 2 art panels? Or is there anything else that would be a lot more effective, cost the same, and just look nice? So Rob's going to suggest the ones from Gick that have the in front of them. I'm going to say there are so many DIY solutions out there, some of which we talked about in this podcast, that if you're on a budget, I am not handy. I am aggressively unhandy, if I can tell you that. I don't like. The more I learn how to do, the more I have to do. So I won't call it weaponized incompetence, but it like skirts it. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't want to know how to do that, because if I know how to do that just a little bit, I'll want to be able to do it better and then do it right. And next thing I know, I'm now doing it. And I don't want to have to do something else. But building acoustic panels is so easy. It's almost ludicrous. Then what we have had people do on this podcast is essentially go and buy wooden, like, what were they?
It's like the pre-made lattice for a fence outside. Like, so you know, the very top of your fence around your backyard, it might have a decorative lattice. Those are like pre-made, and they come in like just shy of 2 feet by 4 feet. And it's like perfect to just put on the front. You can stain them whatever color you want, and you put that on top of your DIY panels. Or like one thing I like recommending, Acoustimac. If you don't want to do cuts and measurements and cut the fabric and all that type of stuff, but you're willing to do some assembly at home to save money, I love Acoustimac's DIY kits, including you can get just the frame and the fabric, that's all pre-cut, ready to go. And then you provide your own insulation, because all you need is the 24-inch on-center bats of insulation and get the absolutely standard 3.5-inch thickness. That works wonderfully. So you get the 4-inch depth DIY kits from Acoustimac. You get your own 24-inch on-center, 3.5-inch deep insulation, and then you get some lattices that would normally go on the top of a fence, and now you have decorative DIY panels. You could probably afford to make about 4 of them on your budget. That's what you'd be looking at if you went that route. And that would be worthwhile, right? You could do a couple of panels behind your front left and right speakers on the front wall. You could do a couple of panels at the first reflection points. Or if your seats are close to the back wall, I would prioritize putting a couple panels directly behind your heads, directly behind your seats if your seats are close to that back wall. So yeah, you can do quite a lot with 4 panels, and cost-wise, that's the best you're going to get, is doing things that way. But yeah, if you want some pre-made panels and you want them to be decorative, yeah, you're kind of looking at only being able to afford 2. So I'm not going to say that's not worth doing, but of course it's not optimal, right? I would probably prioritize either. Again, if your seats are really close to the back wall, put them behind your head. That's the number one priority if your seats are close to the back wall. But if you have a whole bunch of space behind you, like Harman's research says the best place to use just 2 panels is actually on the front wall, right behind your speakers, that you're going to glean the most benefit from doing that. You could, of course, do the first reflection points on the side walls, but Harman's research says the front wall is actually the most important if you don't have a wall right behind your head. If you have a wall really close behind your head, that's the number one priority, put them there. So GIK has their slat fuser panels. These look exactly like what you were talking about from Costco, but these actually work.
Yeah.
These actually do something. But you would ideally go for the 4-inch thickness. Like, that's really going to deliver some results, in terms of getting you down to the crossover range between your speakers and subs. You really want to go for the 4-inch if you can at all. But of course, you can save some money by going with the 2-inch, and that's doing something. It's doing way more than those Costco panels. Don't get the Costco panels. Those aren't doing anything useful. But if you can at all, go with the 4-inch thick panels. Now, GIK has other very decorative ones. Again, same idea, a proper absorption panel with a decorative wooden lattice on the front of them. So they have their Impression series. Those are the really decorative ones. They are a little bit less expensive than the slat fuser panels, but only like $10 to $20 less expensive per panel, but that might just allow you to fit the budget. Or they have their ones that are like mathematically calculated. I'm just showing on screen right now the Impression series patterns and the various wood finishes you can choose from. But they also have their Alpha series. These are mathematically calculated cuts in these panels, and those ones are right about the same price as the slat fuser panels. But if you just like the looks of the slats, those are actually properly calculated to provide actual diffusion. The Impression series really are just decoration. If you do want to get art panels, then yeah, the affordable ones would be from Acoustimac again. So it's really Acoustimac or GIK. Those are going to be the options we point you to. And like if you go with their curated collection, like already pre-done panels, you can get those for between $165 to $190 per panel. So again, about 2 of them would be all you could get, but they only come in 2-inch thickness. So I would prefer to get the ones from GIK at the thicker 4-inch thickness if you could, or do the DIY route.
Okay. David just moved from Florida to Minnesota. I mean, temperature-wise, I'm not sure if that's an upgrade, but I don't actually know what's going on politically in Minnesota, but it's definitely got to be different than what's happening down here. His new house has a finished basement, which he did not have in Florida, guaranteed. He's using the downstairs family room as his home theater area. It's open to everything. There's no door at the top of the stairs. Might as well be an infinity square feet. Yeah. Don't forget about where the speakers are located in this photo. That was right after the movers brought everything in, and curtains for the windows are on the way, so there's some measure of light control coming. It's a big freaking room.
It's a big room. Like, even just the home theater area is pretty sizable to begin with, and then it's open to a whole bunch of other stuff. We do also have a diagram of the whole basement going on, but there's also a whole floor above this that this space is also open to.
This is the basement?
Speaking. This is the basement, yes.
Does he know that it opens to the outside world? Because I don't think that's how basements are supposed to work.
Well, I'm sure there's like the front of the house probably has, like, it's probably a hill, right? So it's flat at the back and up at the front, yeah. That's pretty standard.
So where do we think he should put his speakers? I vote for a different, smaller room.
I mean, he's got like a room with a door right beside this. It's the 5th bedroom in the diagram.
Bedroom 5.
Bedroom 5.
Put it in there.
That looks like a great home theater space. It's a totally enclosed rectangle of a room.
So it's a 12 by something greater than 12 feet.
It's like it's 13 by 13 by like 18. You could definitely work with that if you want a dedicated home theater.
That's where I would put it. And it looks like it has its own bathroom, maybe? Is that a bathroom?
No, I think that's...
Is that a closet?
I think it's closet, yeah.
It's a closet. And then there's a bathroom just across. Yeah, put it in there. How many kids do you have?
Because I mean,
one of them can sleep in the family room. You tell them they get the big room.
There's certainly nothing wrong with having like a TV and a sound system in the open room where you're going to be entertaining and stuff like that. But like, if you want dedicated home theater, fully pressurized bass cinema reference levels, then
do you know how much money you can save on subwoofers alone just by putting it in this other room? Right. Are you joking? A couple of little small sealed subwoofers, like buy a water heater and then put the box in the corner and tell your wife you're going to need 4 of those for just the subwoofers in this other space. So let's just assume let's just assume that we still want TV and speakers in this open room. I'm all for that. It's a wonderful entertaining space that you've got here. So, you know, what would we do if you want to have surround sound? If you don't just want to stop at 2.2, you know, then are these
then what
lights
are we gonna do?
In the ceiling or are these speakers?
Those are lights in the ceiling. Those are not speakers in the ceiling. They're not pre-installed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't hate where it is right now, to be honest with you. I don't really see that there's a better space for the TV other than where it is.
Oh, the TV is fine, yeah. And honestly, in this kind of completely unpredictable predicament, I'm not even opposed to the 2 subwoofers where you have them at the front acting as speaker stands. It's if you move those across it's not gonna, because they're not actually across the space. They're just rearranged. So
tell you what, if you want to take those subwoofers and put them on either side of your couch and put your surrounds on top of them, I'd be like, yeah, it's all right, do that.
But I mean, honestly, for surrounds, like I mean, I guess you could do 7, but I wouldn't bother doing more than 5 in here. It's like I'm looking at basically the column at the bottom of the stairs. I'm like, can you hang one of those prime elevations on the column at the bottom of the stairs for the surround right speaker? And then you do have like wood dividers between the large windows on the left. I'm like, can another prime elevation go like in between the windows on the wood part, the framing part? Because it actually says right.
Which column are you talking about? By the stairs?
Yeah, the stairs, like the bottom of the stairs.
Oh, I see that little column. I see what you're talking about.
But, you know, a prime elevation can hang there, and then, like, it actually says it's 2 2x6s that are the part in between the windows. So that's just wood through and through. I'm like, okay, so, you know, surround left.
Right in.
Yeah, I think that works.
That's I think you could do it that way. I'd be okay with that. If you wanted to do stands, you could do stands, but it's a family area. Maybe you don't want to do stands, but you've got, like, that little round table right in front of that thing anyways. I bet that thing moves around like crazy anyways. Why not? Sure. Why not? Well, you could put stands on either side of the TV.
Oh, you could definitely do speaker stands. Sure.
Yeah. I would not bother with Atmos. I would not bother with surround backs.
I know, right?
I would just go 5.
Like, I would save all that for bedroom 5 and turn bedroom 5 into a dedicated theater room.
I would go stereo in here. I'd get some tower speakers, put them on either side of the TV.
You could.
And just say, Bob's your uncle, I'm done.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. And then move everything else into the home theater. That will be in bedroom 5. But maybe you can't do that. So we already said we answered the question, but anyways, here's the rest of the question that I didn't read. He's using a Denon X4300H, so Atmos is an option. Nope. He's got one SVS PB4000 sub and a PB12 Plus that's basically equal in size. SVS bookshelf, ultra bookshelf and center speakers for LCR, and then 4 private elevations in the white finish. He'd like to have at least surround speakers properly installed, maybe do Atmos. He's open to running speaker wire into the carpet or doing some in-ceiling wiring and speaker installation work. Whether we suggest the closest thing to optimal setup in the room allows. So that we already answered that. I think 5.1 or 2 in your case. If you're going to keep it in here and just put the surround speakers to either side of you, wherever that ends up being. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, however you run the wires is how you run the wires. If it were me, I would. Well,
yeah, because you could certainly go through the ceiling to go to that column position on the right, and the column position in between the windows on the left as well. That's certainly an option. Or you could go through the carpet and run it up the wall. That will also work.
So his current TV is a 75-inch Sony X900E. It isn't big enough, and he'd like to be right up to date on features. He could get a 98-inch TCL QM 851G. Should he get that? It's currently selling for $4,000. Pretty much everything plays from his Apple TV 4K. He's willing to spend as much as $6,000 max, but he's looking to go the projector route in this room. Would he be an utter fool not to get an 83-inch OLED instead? Sadly, the 97-inch OLEDs are not an option within his budget. How far away is he sitting? Do we know this?
We don't know for sure, and of course the seat could move versus where it is now, because that's where the movers have placed it for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this really is just the question of how big do you want that field of view? Because, I mean, you can justify a 98-inch. You're over 10 feet. That's going to be guaranteed.
Definitely looks like that, yeah, for sure.
So, and I mean, I don't imagine the idea is, I'm gonna move this couch in this room to be within 7.5 feet of the TV. Like it seems unlikely. It would feel weird. It would be a weird layout.
Yeah, it would be a weird layout. I would go to the bigger TV if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see. So first of all, coming from the TV you already have, we have to keep that in mind, right? It's not like he's coming from a Kuro Plasma or coming from an OLED.
Yeah,
he's coming from a TV that flat out isn't as good as the TCL 98-inch QM851G.
So it's going to be an upgrade anyways. And
it's going to be an upgrade both ways. It's going to be a big size upgrade that you're definitely going to notice, and it's an upgrade in all picture quality aspects as well. As good as your Sony is, it was a very good TV when it came out, but yeah, the TCL has surpassed it in every conceivable way. So I think that's the way to go in this instance. I don't think you're a fool whatsoever for not getting an OLED in this case.
So will this Denon X4300H prevent him from getting every possible feature out of his Apple TV 4K into either the 98-inch TCL or the 83-inch OLED? So that's what I have, right? The Denon X4300.
I always forget if you're the 43 or the 42, but I'm pretty sure you're the 43.
Yeah. So it is been problematic to get full everything. Like it doesn't want to send
Dolby Vision, right? Has been a little flaky.
It's been flaky on it. I can make it happen, but I have to make it happen. It doesn't want to happen. The
4300H does not have eARC.
Yes.
So if you're a higher end gamer and you want 4K 120 support, you'll have to, if you're plugging that straight into the TV, because the 4300 is not going to pass through 4K 120. Not a problem for your Apple TV 4K, right? Video wise, it's not a problem for passing 4K 60 through. That's perfectly fine. But if you had a, Xbox Series X or a PlayStation 5 or a high end gaming PC, to get higher frame rates than 60 frames, you'd be plugging those straight into the TV, and then your AV receiver doesn't have eARC, so you wouldn't be getting full lossless audio coming back. But if you're stopping at 5.1, like we're saying anyway, Dolby Digital 5.1 is perfectly fine for this setup. Yeah. I'm a little bit less worried in that. Technically speaking, there is something video-wise that your Apple TV 4K can output that your TCL, if you go with the TCL, can accept that the 4300H cannot pass through, and that's HDR10+. Right. It can pass through HDR10. It can pass through Dolby Vision, but Tom has experienced some glitches doing that. HDR10 is very reliable, so if you're fine with doing that. But the 4300H will not pass through HDR10 Plus at all, and the TCL TVs do support both Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus, as does the Apple TV 4K. So like Amazon Prime has many things in HDR10 Plus, but not in Dolby Vision. And of course, like Disney Plus and Netflix, they use Dolby Vision, not HDR10 Plus. So if you wanted the very best from every service, then the 4300H technically would be holding you back.
Yeah. I have to go get my car. So
okay.
I am leaving. Rob will continue the podcast until
I'll carry on for a while, until I feel like stopping. Yeah.
So I will be, good luck to everybody. Hope everybody has a great day.
And Tom would be away next week, so this is goodbye for Tom for this week and next week.
Try not to cry, guys. I know everybody's going to be real sad. Bye.
Adios, Tom. Have a good time. Okay, so carrying on, I'm on to Dane now. And Dane is actually asking on behalf of a friend of his. So Dane's friend wants to get a TV that he can bring outside when the weather is nice so he can watch sports by the pool. It won't live outside permanently, and Dane figures some sort of stand with wheels on it would be a good idea to go along with this new TV that this friend wants to purchase. So his friend wants at least a 65-inch in terms of screen size, maybe bigger if possible, but he doesn't want to spend more than $1,500. So that's going to be the limitation as far as potential size stuff goes. So do we have any suggestions for the TV? And do we have any suggestions for the stand with wheels that would make it easier to move it in and out of the house to the pool side? Yes, I do. So I'm going to say this is going outside. You want light output. You want crazy, crazy light output so you can contend with sunlight. I mean, if you're going poolside, I imagine that could be sunbathing conditions and you really are dealing with sunlight. So nothing for the price point right now is going to beat TCL again, actually the same series we just talked about in the last question, the QM851G series. The 65-inch model in that lineup can be had for $1,500. It maxes out the budget. You wouldn't be able to get the 75-inch of the QM851G, but if you just want the light output, this is like sustaining 2,000 nits. It can hit 3,000, 4,000 nit peaks. Oodles of local dimming zones, mini LED backlighting. That's the one I would go for if you're really sunlit. Now, maybe you've got some shade in the backyard. Maybe isn't the maximum light output is what you need, and the greater size would be nicer for what you want. Sticking with TCL, they have their QM751G series, and you can get the 75-inch size of that for also $1,500. The exact same price point, but at the 75-inch size. Now, fewer local dimming zones, but still mini LEDs. Not as bright as the QM851G, but almost as bright as last year's QM850 series. So they went from 850 to 851 from 2023 to 2024, respectively. Now the new 751 series is almost the equivalent of last year's 850 series. Not quite, but it's pretty darn close. And the QM850 from last year was no slouch in light output, and neither is the 751. So it's a little bit a matter of, do you have some shade? Do you have some awnings? Anything like that? And the screen size choice, 65 or 75, both of them $1,500, but it's going to be a TCL TV that I recommend here. So QM851 for the maximum brightness, but at 65 inches, or QM751 for the larger size, little bit lower brightness, but still very impressive light output. For the wheeled stand, there's one you can get right from Amazon.com. It's from a company called Vivo, and it costs $100. I don't think that's crazy expensive. It also has a little platform that you could put a speaker or a laptop on, like they're showing in the image. Some nice things here. It is height adjustable. It's rated to support, up to 110 pounds, so absolutely fine for either of those TCL TVs. One thing I really like about it is it has locking wheels, and I think that's important when this is going to go poolside, because there are plenty of other stands that have wheels, but the wheels don't lock, and I think that's really important in this case, and I don't think the price is egregious at $100. So yeah, we'll have a link to that, the Vivo wheeled TV stand, and I think that's going to be a great solution for you. Okay, let's go on to our next question asker, who is Billy. Billy recently bought an 83-inch LG C3 OLED TV. Unfortunately, anytime there's like a panning shot going across, or particularly during dark scenes, he can easily see some obvious vertical banding on his OLED TV. And he's like, is that just normal? Because he's heard about vertical banding on OLED TVs. Is every OLED TV like that, where it's plainly noticeable in dark scenes and panning shots? Or is there maybe some setting he could change that would fix it? Or is this just a case he got a particularly bad unit when it comes to vertical banding, and it would be worth his while to exchange it? It is worth your while to exchange it in this case. If you are looking for perfection, a 100% absence of any vertical banding whatsoever when you put up 100% full screen gray slides and go through them a percentage at a time. That's expecting too much, all right? Every LG OLED is going to have a little bit of vertical banding if you really, really look for it. But some units are definitely much worse than others. It actually has to do with the manufacturing process. There's part of the process when they're sort of laminating together the layers of the OLED. They're sort of rolling the panels through a heater. And it seems to be the case that like the first unit through the heater and the last unit through the heater, when the rollers and the heaters are kind of still warming up or starting to cool down, so at the very beginning and the very end of the run of panels that go through this heating and laminating process, those ones get the worst vertical banding. It's the uneven heat that's being applied from the rollers still heating up at the very beginning and starting to cool down at the very end. So it seems like it's kind of a 90% are really good and about 10% have some visible issues. So you got a little bit of a bum unit. That's unfortunate, but this is a case that's worth exchanging. Like I say, you cannot expect literal perfection, but these days on the good units, it's pretty like normal content. You're not seeing vertical banding. It's only if you put up the egregious test pattern and really, really look for it. All right, little pause here while I take a sip of water just to wet my whistle. And back to our questions now with Nick. Grimani Systems, Anthony Grimani's company, of course. They've announced their new reflectance system. This is a ceiling-mounted center speaker. It's actually just a tweeter in a large horn. And it's designed to go above the seats facing the front wall, basically like you would do with a front projector, so ceiling-mounted front projector facing a screen. Same idea, except it's a center tweeter in a large horn there, and the idea is that it's going to bounce its sound off of a large video display like, Samsung's micro-LED displays, the Wall, or Onyx, and that's supposed to make installation of speakers more feasible because, of course, you can't put them behind those large video wall displays. They are not acoustically transparent like a projection screen can be. So, like I said, it's really just a tweeter. It's a 1-inch compression tweeter. The horn is large. It's 26 inches by 20 inches by 16 inches. So that's a big old cabinet there, available in black or white finish. Built in is 320 watts of amplification. So this is meant to get that's 320 watts just for a tweeter. So that's ridiculously high wattage for a tweeter alone. And then as part of the rest of the Grimani speaker system, there's digital signal processing that actually reroutes any frequencies below this center tweeter all by itself, below its frequency range. All of the other sounds get rerouted to the front, left, and right speakers. And the price is $4,500. So Nick wants to know, what are our thoughts? Will this actually sound good if you're running short of space below your huge flat panel or modular display, and a regular center speaker is basically going to have to go on the floor or up against the ceiling if it's above it? Would you be better off with a traditional speaker but suboptimally placed, or something like this, designed to bounce the sound off of the screen at the front of the room? I have not heard this in person. This is a similar solution to what they're looking to do in commercial movie theaters for those Onyx Samsung displays, replacing projection system in full-sized cinemas. Can't put the speakers behind the screen anymore. So at the moment, they tend to be doing an array of speakers around the frame of the screen, and basically just creating phantom center both horizontally and vertically, because of course with the tiered seating in a full-size cinema, you can do the above and below as well as side to side and try to phantom center for as many audience members as you can, but they are definitely experimenting with reflected sound, very much like this idea. The design is more or less what it would have to be for any genuine reflecting to work, which is it's only going to work at high frequencies. It's only going to work at directional high frequencies. Any sounds with wavelengths long enough that they start to spread out are just not going to reflect very well off of a solid surface at the front of the room. So it has to be limited to high frequencies. And then they're doing this rerouting method to send lower frequencies than tweeter frequency. So we're probably talking anything below 2 kilohertz. It might even be higher than that to really make the reflectance work. But all of those frequencies are getting rerouted to the existing front, left, and right speakers, and acting as phantom center again. Because those are still those aren't bass frequencies. Those are still directional. We can still triangulate what direction those sounds are coming from. So to make them come from the center, you're still doing a phantom center there. You're just trying to get more direct sound for the treble frequencies, the high and directional frequencies, by doing the reflected sound. So, of course, I have some doubts about the efficacy of it. But when the alternative is I'm using a center speaker that's very obviously suboptimally positioned, I'm back to thinking that just straight up phantom center makes the most sense. When you're talking about a screen size that's this large, then what are the chances that at least the seats that you care about are not within the boundaries of the front, left, and right speakers, right? What are the chances you're sitting directly in front of the left speaker or directly in front of the right speaker or to the outside of the left speaker or the outside of the right speaker when your screen is so large that it precludes you from placing a center speaker at a reasonable height or, of course, placing a speaker behind the screen? Personally, I mean, look, I'd be willing to give this thing an audition, be willing to give this thing a try. But I suspect that just good old Phantom Center is probably going to deliver the best results. Yeah, that's where I would land on this. That's my thought on it. But of course, that is without having heard it for myself, and I can't really say for sure. So let's see. Well, we could probably do a couple more here. Sasi is back this week again. He wants to ask, how does one reliably measure screen gain anyway? Online, people are pointing to resources like AccuCal or Pixel Home Theater. They've compiled lists of projection screens that they've measured and done what they've measured as the gain of those screens. They don't always agree with the specs from the manufacturers. But even between just those two resources, their numbers vary between AccuCal and Pixel Home Theater, seemingly quite significantly sometimes. And then Seymour AV went as far as to post two gain numbers on their spec sheets, one that they feel is genuinely accurate, and they're comparing it to the industry standard for what is like defined as a 1.0 gain, which is a magnesium oxide white board. And then they include a second figure that they're like, well, this is more in line with what all our of other manufacturers that we're competing against. They post their figures in their spec sheets and they kind of bump up those gain figures a little bit. So like, if you want to compare apples to what other manufacturers are posting, here's our Seymour AV gain numbers. But if you want what we think the genuine gain is as measured compared to a magnesium oxide whiteboard, then here's our other figures. So they call the benchmarked gain the one that all their competitors are using, and then their unbenchmarked gain, what they think is the genuine number. But then AccuCal and Pixel Home Theater have measured Seymour AV screens, and they have disagreeing numbers with either of the specs that Seymour has listed. So with all those numbers floating around, and plenty more if you search a little further online, how do we know what the real gain is for any given projection screen? Yeah, that is a bit tough. One of the issues is that ideally, when you're measuring the screen gain, the projector would be like centered on the screen, right? So like the lens is right in line with the middle of the screen and shooting the image straight forward, straight line, no angles involved whatsoever. But then you would also take the measurement off the screen right at that center position. You're like, well, you physically can't do that unless you have a ring meter that allows light through the center of the meter. That's a pretty specialized meter to do that. If you're using a normal light meter to take the reading, you have to put the meter at an angle. Otherwise, the shadow will be, you'll be physically occluding the light that you're trying to measure. So that's where we run into issues, because between the various publications, they're very often putting the projector at a bit of an angle. Maybe it's their own installation. And then the meter is also at an angle, so you're actually getting like an off-axis reading, which is why so many of the measurements tend to be a lower gain measurement than the spec that the manufacturers produce. Now, what the manufacturers are listing on their spec sheets, I mean, it's like how projectors, right? They always bump up what the lumen output and the contrast range is versus when those things are measured in real life. So it's really unfortunate because, I mean, there is a standard. There is an actual industry standard for how we measure reflectance off the screen, and we have this standardized magnesium oxide white board, and you simply compare how many lumens came off the similarly sized magnesium oxide board versus the sample of the screen material you're using under similar conditions. And it's, if it's 1.1 gain, then it's 10% more light got reflected back than the magnesium oxide board. That should be quite easy to standardize. Seymour AV does a pretty good job of it. So when they say their unbenchmarked gain is 1.1, that's pretty on the money. And even though AccuCal and Pixel Home Theater might list lower numbers, it's not very much lower. Like I think AccuCal was like 1.05, whereas, Seymour AV said 1.1. But, just the slightest bit of change in angle between the projector and the light meter that's reading it, that little bit of off angle versus using a light meter with a ring design with the light going right through the middle of it. That more or less accounts for it. So I basically would say if you're looking at other manufacturers, take their gain claim and probably knock it down by 0.2. Like, honestly, that's going to be pretty close. You're going to be in the ballpark rule of thumb in terms of what the real gain actually is. That seems to just be pretty common across the industry. Sasi's second question that we'll get to this week is, we mentioned JVC's, or I mentioned specifically JVC's laser-driven DLP projector, their LX-NZ30, sells for about $3,500. And he was talking about one of our other listeners, Brandon, who himself didn't specifically ask for a projector upgrade, but was, figuring he didn't want to venture above $5,000, and basically saying, what are the options these days? And I mentioned that JVC. So Sasi's asking, would we actually take that over an Epson 5050 UB, which is long in the tooth now, but it's $3,000 MSRP. You can get it refurbished directly from Epson for $2,300, so over $1,000 price savings. And then Sasi saw a demo of the predecessor to the NZ30, which was the NZ3 from JVC. And he felt the 5050 UB was just clearly better black levels, better contrast, more accurate colors, right? All that. So he's so is the NZ30 that's available now, is that a noticeable upgrade, over the NZ3, making it a much closer competitor performance-wise to the 5050 UB? Or then what about the Home Cinema LS11000, the laser-driven Epson model that can do 4K 120, and it goes on sale for $3,500 from time to time. $4,000 is the MSRP, but it goes on sale for $3,500 fairly frequently, including right now. That's the price. So yeah. I would straight up say, yeah, the Epsons are better when it comes to black level and contrast. The Epsons remain better. DLP just has its limits. It's a 1080p DLP chip. It's being wobbled 4 times to get you the 4K resolution, but that's 4K 60, not 4K 120 on that JVC NZ30. And the Epsons, both of them, the 5050 UB and the LS11000, they straight up beat it in sheer black level and in contrast. But that NZ30 is an improvement, in my opinion, over the NZ3. It's quite similar to how the BenQ HT3560 is a very noticeable upgrade over the BenQ HT3550. Just, a couple years apart. The model number didn't change very much in either case, but it is quite noticeable. Texas Instruments, they improved what's going on with those 1080p DLP chips. I think some advancement has been made inside the light engine to cut down on the reflectance. Maybe they put, the carbon nanotubes, the Vantablack in there, something like that to better control any stray light, better absorb it inside that sealed DLP light engine. There is a quite visibly noticeable, if you do a head-to-head comparison of the 3550 from BenQ versus the 3560, or the NZ3 from JVC versus the NZ30. It's pretty darn noticeable. But in both cases, the Epsons still beat it. Where I was coming from is, for that price point, that NZ30 from JVC, it's getting you the full 4K pixels on screen, whereas the Epson 5050 UB is half 4K resolution. It's a 1080p panel being wobbled twice per frame, not 4 times per frame. So it's if that's really important to you, yeah, if you're in a non-light controlled room where the absolute black level and the dynamic range is not going to be as critical, your walls are white, there's a little bit of ambient light, then it's not going to be as critical there, and maybe there'll be something you appreciate about the JVC, the smaller size, the lighter weight. But of course, the Epsons, both the 5050 UB and the LS11000, they have the fully motorized lens, and the JVC NZ30 does not have any motorization for the lens. It's all manual controls. And the Epsons have larger lens shift range, and larger zoom range. So yeah, there's plenty of times where I absolutely would get the Epson. It's just that in the wording of Sasi's question last week, he was kind of what are the alternatives? If you want to go $3,500 or lower, if you want to go $3,000, is the 5050 from Epson, as old as it is that the only game in town? Is that the only viable option? And it's under that context where I was no, there's definitely cases where I could point someone at that JVC NZ30 and feel good about giving them that recommendation. So that alternative exists is basically the context that I had there. Okay, let's see what else we can do here. We're at the 2-hour mark, but I'm all by myself. Tom can't stop me. Let's see if we can do 1 or 2 more. Andy. Andy believes he understands the overall difference between regular HDMI-ARC audio return channel versus HDMI-ARC enhanced audio return channel. But in terms of taking as much advantage of ARC as possible, he isn't quite sure that he's doing it right now. In his setup, he's got a 77-inch LG G3 OLED, and that's the same TV I have now, and a Denon X3800H. So he's right up to date. I mean, there is the G4 OLED that's come out now, but yeah, feature-wise, he's right up to date. His main sources are his Apple TV 4K, and he's still rocking an Oppo UDP-203 Ultra HD Blu-ray player. Me too. Can't part with that thing. Too precious. So he did what seemed like the typical thing. He plugged his sources into the Denon receiver and then ran a single HDMI cable from the Denon to the LG, and he used the HDMI-ARC port on both the Denon and the LG. So that option is there. So Andy basically asked, is there any scenario where he would get more bandwidth, less data compression on the audio side of things by either using the LG TV's built-in apps and sending that audio back to the Denon receiver via HDMI-ARC, or plugging the Apple TV 4K directly into the TV and then using ARC to send the audio from the TV back to the Denon receiver. Does ARC hold any audio advantages over plugging the source device, the Apple TV 4K or the Oppo Ultra HD Blu-ray player, directly into the Denon? And the answer is straight up no. There is no advantage audio-wise to using ARC. Plugging the sources directly into the AV receiver remains the best way to get the audio signal. ARC doesn't have to be a downgrade, but in some cases, it can be, because there are a number of TVs out there where even via HDMI-ARC, they don't support DTS formats, or if they do support DTS, it's only vanilla DTS 5.1 and not lossless DTS HD Master Audio or DTS-X. There are certainly quite a few TVs out there, including older LG models. The G3 returned support of DTS audio formats to LG OLEDs. In, I think, the 3 or 4 years prior to that, they weren't supporting DTS formats at all via ARC. So there can be a downside to using ARC. There's really no downside on the audio side of things, plugging your source devices directly into your, especially up-to-date Denon X3800H AV receiver. On the other side of things, of course, the difference between regular ARC and ARC is that support for lossless audio. Regular audio return channel ARC has the same limitations as our old optical audio cables. So it was vanilla Dolby Digital 5.1, or in some cases, Dolby Digital ES, right? Dolby Digital X, right, with a 6.1, matrixed into a 5.1 signal. Vanilla DTS 5.1, or in some cases, DTS ES 6.1. But not Dolby True HD, not DTS HD Master Audio, and then some instances of HDMI-ARC, the regular audio return channel, could do the lossy version of Dolby Atmos, the Dolby Digital Plus data compressed lossy version of Dolby Atmos, but there is no version of HDMI-ARC that could do lossless Atmos or lossless DTS-X. So eARC gave you the capability to do lossless audio, multi-channel PCM rather than being limited to just 2 channels of PCM via regular ARC, and eARC added support for Dolby True HD and the lossless version of Atmos that can come with that. DTS HD Master Audio and the lossless version of DTS-X that can come with that. eARC supports all of that in theory, but it's still up to the manufacturers to actually implement it, and there are some that just don't support the DTS formats. But yeah, in your case, leave your source devices plugged into your Denon. You're absolutely getting the very highest audio quality that you possibly can. You're not missing out. And if you ever do happen to use the LG TV's built-in apps, you have the HDMI-ARC connection already made and you're ready to go. So let's see. Let's finish up with Infinite Gary. We can't have an AVRant episode without Infinite Gary, so he'll be the last this week. Without saying any names, getting us into any unwanted flame wars, a lot of our listeners might be familiar. There's a certain YouTube channel, a certain website along with that YouTube channel. This person picks apart lots of different speakers, points out all the flaws that they can find, and then sells upgrade kits, typically passive crossover upgrades that supposedly improve almost every aspect of the speaker's performance. So if this is ringing a bells, yeah, that's who we're talking about, but I'm not going to say their name. Don't flame me if you're like, is that the person and I really like them and I hate what you're about to say to them? Nope. Not them. There, that's my out. Plausible deniability. Never said the name of the channel. So This channel that we're talking about, they recently tore into the new SVS Ultra Evolution bookshelf speakers, and they mainly focused on the ringing that they measured in the upper end of the woofer's response and the on-axis peak that turns into an off-axis dip in the lower end of the tweeter's response when just the drivers were measured individually. And then they also had problems with the physical placement of the tweeter, which is nearly equidistant from all edges of the speaker except the bottom, right? So it's like equidistant from the two sides and the top of the speaker, just where it's physically positioned. In the cabinet is like, okay, so that just compounds any diffraction issues, which they believe show up in the measurements, as well as this sort of peak in the on-axis response and a dip in the off-axis response at the same frequencies, the lower end of the tweeter's range. So the claim of this channel is that SVS simply didn't put much effort into the engineering. They could have easily fixed all these issues with slightly different components or a different choice of, how the surround was applied on the woofer to get rid of that ringing at the high end of the woofer's range. Everything in the built-in crossover is like cheap and junk, according to this person, which apparently every speaker in existence is that way if you look at any more of their videos, but also that it, doesn't contain enough parts, not steep enough slopes, all that. So Gary's just like, okay, so is any of that correct? Is any of that meaningful? Should SVS have done a better job right from the design phase, like that tweeter physical placement, yeah. Is there anything to this? Okay, so, this is one of the cases. These cases really frustrate me, because some people thrive on this when they want to debate it on forums, but this is kind of like PS Audio, right? PS Audio's videos, which I will say by name because we said them before, and it's going to get a flame war, but yeah, it's a similar case. It's like, of course, there are things that are absolutely correct in what's being stated, but there's so much that isn't correct or is like really weird conclusions to draw from the objectively correct information, or just, strange conceptual ideas that they've espoused for years and years and years at this point. Like there's so much wrong that I don't think it's worth the time watching these videos, because these are like half-hour long videos, watching these videos to sift out the little bits that are correct and then trying to go through things like, bullet points one at a time. One at a time, where it's like, yeah, this is right, but then this is wrong. This is right, but the conclusion that's drawn from it is wrong. And it's like trying to just bullet point it out. Some people thrive on that. They love doing that on the forums, right? Point by point. They want to dissect it. That's their favorite way to debate something. I just can't stand it. I don't have the time for that. I find it just tiresome. And yes, I like to, in these instances, throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm like, there's just too much wrong here that I don't care about the parts that are right, and I don't want to dissect the minutia. So, is it 100% wrong? No, it is not 100% wrong. But the conclusions that are drawn are completely erroneous. The entire business model of this channel is selling you upgrade kits. And it's like, okay, so if I had another $800 to $1,500 to put towards the price of this speaker, could SVS have made it even better? Yeah, they probably could have. It also would have put them into a totally different price bracket. It's unreasonable. I don't find it worth my while to dissect the minutia. But no, it's not as though it's 100% wrong. If for someone saying, yeah, ignore them because everything they say is wrong, that's an incorrect statement. There are truthful statements made in these videos. Absolutely. There are truthful statements in PS Audio's videos. But yeah, I throw the baby out with the bathwater on these ones. It's too much minutia to dig into. So I will leave things there for this week, and I will say that Stan's question is already on the list for next week, when we will have a guest co-host, maybe more than one guest co-host. I'm working on that. Also got more questions from Sasi, question from Henry that came in on Monday. So yes, those are there. I did want to mention several of the questions this week, they all showed up I guess whatever spam filter we have on our main email address it, just decided, hey, here's a bunch that I put in a spam filter and finally decided to forward to you this week. So, I mean, they weren't ages and ages late, but when I said last week what questions we had left over, I didn't have all the names that were on the list this week. So I'm glad our spam filter finally caught up and we're able to get to those. But yes, a couple of questions left over for next week. And that's what we'll get to. Tom won't be here. I'll go back up and thank our listeners of the week once more, which is Andrew. Thank you so much for your PayPal donation. Really appreciate your financial support via PayPal. We also have Patreon at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you please. Big thanks to our 133 patrons over there. Joe, thank you so much for the Amazon Canada gift card that you sent to me for the one-on-one advice that we went through. And then we love the notes of gratitude and encouragement that we got from Martin, David, Joe, Billy, Sasi, Gurinder, Andy, Stan, and Dazz. Thank you all so much for sending those in. We really appreciate them. And a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you want your questions answered, all you have to do is email them to us. Our email address is question@avrant.com. So on behalf of Tom Andry, I am Rob H. This has been AVRant. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.